Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Smith, Chair of the Planning Commission of the Town of Los Gatos, and I am calling to order the meeting of Wednesday, July 23rd, 2014. Mr. Paulson, could you call the roll, please?
Vice Chair Birch.
Here.
Commissioner Sayoc.
Here.
Commissioner Badami.
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Talasfor.
Here.
Chair Smith.
Here.
And Commissioner Erickson has an excused absence.
Thank you. Could I have Commissioner Sayoc say the Pledge of Allegiance with us? Thank you. It's wonderful to see so many participants in the audience this evening. As you know, the Town of Los Gatos strongly encourages active participation in the public process, which we believe is the cornerstone of democracy and certainly essential to us as planning commissioners so that we conduct the business of the Town of Los Gatos. There are several ways for members of the public to communicate to the Planning Commission. One way is during the verbal communication period. That is when any member of the public, after filling out a card that you'll find behind your seats, can speak to the commission on a matter that is not on the agenda this evening. So if you're here to talk about or share with us your thoughts on the agendized item, please do not step forward during this verbal communication period. But if you want to talk with us about anything else, fill in a card and step forward, and we'll give you 3 minutes to talk with us. There are 2 other ways to communicate your ideas. One would be this evening to fill out a card. You'll see again there in the back of the seat in front of you. Fill out your name, address, and say what it is that you're going to discuss this evening. The third way is any member of the public can send an email to the town staff and communicate their information in writing. All of that information is comprised for us and sent with our packets. I don't believe we have any verbal communication cards. So these are the cards, ladies and gentlemen. If you intend to speak this evening, please fill out a card and pass it to the staff on the right. Mr. Paulson, there are no issues on the consent calendar?
That's correct.
And there are no continued public hearings?
Correct.
All right. Then I'm going to now open the public hearing portion of the agenda. Pardon me? Oh, we have the minutes. Yes, I'm sorry. Forgot about the minutes. So have my fellow commissioners read the minutes, and is there a motion? Yes, Commissioner Talasfor.
Thank you. Yes, I read the minutes. I have no comments to make. Anybody else? No. Seeing that, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting June 25, 2014.
And I have a second, Commissioner Birch.
I will second the motion.
All right, thank you. We are now going to open the public hearing.
Oh, take the vote. We have to
Oh,
vote.
my goodness. You know what? I'm so anxious to get to that first item. Can you tell? Okay, let's take the vote. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. All right. Now, we are going to move on to the agenda item, which requires the Planning Commission to adopt a specific plan for the property known as the North 40 area. The adoption of the specific plan includes the approval of General Plan Amendment GP 14001 and Zoning Code Amendment Z 14001. Tonight, the Planning Commission will also consider and decide whether to certify the Environmental Impact Report EIR 10-002. Are there any disclosures by any commissioners? Commissioner Birch.
Unfortunately, I have to recuse myself from this item because I live within 500 feet of the proposed property.
And Commissioner Birch, I think that we will probably take the rest of the evening on this item, so you're recused, and we don't think we'll be calling you back. May I have a show of hands of commissioners who have visited the subject property? right. And also, we have received several desk items for this project. Have all the commissioners had an opportunity to review the information on the desk items? Anyone need a few extra minutes? All right. Thank you. We are now going to open the public portion of the public hearing, and we are taking the matter slightly different this evening in terms of procedure than we have done before. The applicant is actually the town of Los Gatos. So this evening you will hear senior staff give the report of the applicant. The commissioners will then ask a series of questions. We will begin with questions on the specific plan that we may have. We will then question the senior staff on the environmental impact report. After that time, I will ask for public testimony, and I will begin calling the members of the public. When I call your name, I'd ask that you step to the microphone. You have 3 minutes to address us. Please pull the microphone down towards you. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light will come on, and that will tell you that your time is running out. When I call your name, I'll probably call 2 people following you so that people are ready to step forward and they know what order they're being called in. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. At the end of the public testimony from you all, we will then ask the applicant if there's anything they'd like to add to the testimony, and the commissioners will then have an opportunity to ask any further questions they have. When I close the public portion of the public hearing, that means that the commissioners then will begin their deliberations, make a motion, or ask further questions of staff. So that's going to be our sequence this evening. I'm now going to call, is it Mr. Paulson or Ms. Privetti? You're going to go first? Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laurel Privetti, Assistant Town Manager and Community Development Director. As the Planning Commission is aware, the North 40 specific plan is one of our Town Council's strategic goals. So this effort is coming forward to you for your recommendation, and the Town Council will be making the final decision. Your deliberations and recommendations are very important to the Town Council, so we appreciate all of your hard work in reviewing all of the materials and your consideration this evening of the public testimony and the staff presentation. We've also invited our consultants and colleagues in other town departments, so that way you have a variety of experts to assist you in your deliberations tonight. I will be passing out the slide presentation, and let me introduce Planning Manager Joel Paulson, who will be leading the presentation for you this evening. Joel?
Thank you, Ms. Privetti, Chair Smith, Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. There are some copies of the PowerPoint presentation on the chair adjacent to the screen. As Chair Smith mentioned, we are here tonight to discuss the North 40 specific plan, the environmental impact report that considered the potential impacts of the development of future development of this specific plan, as well as some general plan text amendments that arose from the advisory committee's work over approximately 2 years, and the addition of a zoning code amendment to add an overlay designation to the zoning map. So the next 2 slides are really just an overview of the presentation. I won't go through these, and for those of you who have been able to get a copy of that, you can take a look at those. So first, just generally, what is a specific plan? Generally, a specific plan provides a framework and regulates future development for a specific area, in this case, the North 40, what the town calls the North 40 area. It will look at the amount and location of potential development for the site, contain goals, policies, standards, and design guidelines and development standards relating to various uses that are considered for the site. Additionally, it will look at transportation and circulation, as well as potential streetscape improvements and plans for infrastructure and other public facilities such as water, sewer, things of that nature. And lastly, it contains a framework for the implementation of the specific plan as development projects come forward before the town for consideration should a specific plan be adopted. So the North 40, as illustrated on the screen, is approximately 44 acres. It is bounded by Highway 85 to the north, Los Gatos Boulevard to the east, Lark Avenue to the south, and Highway 17 to the west. There are a number of different property owners that are that own property in the specific plan area, and for that reason, the town has taken on the challenge of developing a specific plan as is required by the general plan. So the specific plan process was really triggered by the general plan update that was adopted in 2010. Following that update, which required the development of a specific plan prior to approving any entitlements for property in the specific plan area. And so from that, the town council appointed a North 40 Advisory Committee, which met, had 17 meetings over a period of approximately 2 years from 2011 till that was sunsetted in October of 2013 when they completed their work in reviewing the specific plan. As part of that review, there was an online survey that looked at architecture possibilities for the site, 2 community workshops, and then there was 3 town council and planning commission study sessions that were conducted as part of the process for developing the specific plan. In March 2012, the town council adopted a vision statement as well as some guiding principles. The vision statement is obviously in the specific plan on the board. I can read through that if you think necessary, and it's for just for the audience and those who may not be in attendance. The vision statement is: the North 40 reflects the special nature of our hometown. It celebrates our history, agricultural heritage, hillside views, and small town character. The North 40 is seamlessly woven into the fabric of our community, complementing other Los Gatos residential and business neighborhoods. It is respectful of precious community resources and offers unique attributes that enrich the quality of life of all our residents. And so with the vision statement, the council also adopted guiding principles. Those guiding principles are: the North 40 will look and feel like Los Gatos. The North 40 will embrace hillside views, trees, and open space. The North 40 will address the town's residential and/or commercial unmet needs. And the North 40 will minimize or mitigate impacts on town infrastructure, schools, and other community services. Generally, the specific plan contains overall development capacity limitations. Those include the potential for up to 364 residential units, as well as the potential for up to 580,000 square feet of commercial space. There are further limitations in the commercial space that regulate the ultimate diversity of the uses that are potential possibility for the site. And those limitations are that up to 250,000 square feet of that 580,000 square feet can be office and or hotel. And then the second caveat is that a maximum of 400,000 square feet of commercial uses can be located on the site, and those are generally all other uses aside from hotel and office. The specific plan also has requirements for open space. There's a minimum of 30% open space that's a requirement of the specific plan, and that will encompass both green open space as well as hardscape open space in the form of plazas and paseos and things of that nature. So the specific plan also breaks the site up into 3 districts, and going from south to north, or in the illustration on the overhead from left to right, they start with the Lark District, then move to the Transition District, which is in orange color, and then lastly, closest to the intersection of 85 and 17 is the Northern District. And each of these districts has a set of land use parameters that are unique to each of these individual districts. The specific plan contains land use and development standards, and so that's going to be permitted uses, conditional uses, parking, setbacks, height, open space, design guidelines to really help shape development applications as they come forward. It also contains circulation and streetscape concepts for the future development, with the overall goal to connect the North 40 to other areas of the town of Los Gatos and to minimize traffic impacts. And that's both within the site from all modes of transportation, from vehicles to pedestrians to bicycles. This is the conceptual circulation diagram. So this is the possible depiction, one possible depiction of how the circulation would be accomplished in the specific plan. And in the specific plan, you can see those white lines going through various roadways, and so those are where sections are represented in diagrams in the specific plan itself. Specific plan, as mentioned before, also looks at all the infrastructure and other public facilities, which again are water, sewer, storm drainage, stormwater management and water quality, and then obviously utilities. The last portion of the specific plan is the phasing and implementation plan. So the phasing is talked about. Staff has addressed some comments that were raised in an area where the advisory committee wanted further input from the commission. And so phasing was one of those topics that we will want to get some input from the commission on. As the specific plan is written right now, nearly all of the architecture and site applications for new projects would come before the Planning Commission. So those would all be reviewed by the Planning Commission following the adoption of a specific plan. And lastly, it includes components of the infrastructure and the financing really will probably be addressed as projects come forward, and there are numerous vehicles that the town and or developer can request to help with the financing of some pretty significant infrastructure improvements. So the specific plan site, the plan area has historic structures on it, and so a historic report was prepared and was reviewed by the Historic Preservation Committee. After the Historic Preservations Committee's determination that there is some potential historical significance on the site, specifically with two structures in particular, but also other structures, and the fact that the working orchard is a large component of the fabric of that area. So they recommended adding a policy. The policy is in the staff report. It is also on the screen. I'm not going to go through that, but generally, again, it's the red barn and the family house, and then looking at other preservation opportunities and the possibility of an interpretive center for integration into the overall development. So tonight, for some of the issues that the advisory committee wanted the commission and the council ultimately to consider following the preparation of the environmental impact report was, as mentioned before, the phasing and making sure that the phasing is consistent with the vision of the specific plan. Any potential ripple effects that might come from phasing, depending on how that phasing comes to bear from applications as they're processed. Impacts of housing units and then what effect that may or may not have on traffic. Obviously, a traffic study was prepared as part of the environmental impact report, and so that analysis has been done. And lastly, school district communication regarding student generation rates. The draft EIR was sent to the school districts. The town didn't receive any comments from the school district specifically for the EIR. The staff has reached out to the Los Gatos superintendents, and actually later this month we'll be meeting with the K-8 district, Los Gatos Union School District, to discuss this as well as other continued collaboration as we've tried to do through the general plan process, and then as we move through the process and other development applications, big or small, that have impacts to housing. So as mentioned, environmental impact report was prepared. Mitigation measures were required in a number of areas. As a result of those mitigation measures that are required, a mitigation monitoring and reporting program is included in the final EIR. That sets the tone for basically listing the mitigation measures and then looking at the responsible parties for making sure that that implementation takes place, as well as what the timing of that would be. Two impacts that were determined not to be able to be reduced to or mitigated to a less than significant level were traffic and transportation and cultural resources. So because of those two significant unavoidable impacts, the town council ultimately will have to adopt a statement of overriding considerations for the EIR should they decide to certify that. So future development applications, as they come in, none of them can be acted on until the specific plan is adopted. And then obviously the specific plan, as it contains a number of land use and zoning regulations for the plan area itself, the development projects would be evaluated against those, against the specific plan to ensure that they meet the requirements of the specific plan. As I mentioned earlier, applications are proposed to be considered by the Planning Commission, and additionally financing arrangements will be determined at the time the development applications are considered for approval. So tonight, the Planning Commission's role is to consider the specific plan, the environmental impact report that was prepared, evaluating the impacts of the specific plan, as well as the general plan text amendments that are before you and the zoning code amendments, and to forward a recommendation to the town council on all of those items. Next step, following the Planning Commission's recommendation, the matter would go to the town council for final consideration and a decision. That public hearing date won't be set until the Planning Commission completes its work. And if adopted, then the pending architecture and site applications will be processed pursuant to whatever the final version of the specific plan that is adopted. And that concludes staff's presentation. We're available for comments or questions, and we have consultants available as well from both RRM, who is the consultant that prepared the specific plan, as well as EMC, who prepared the environmental consultant, as well as other consultants as noted, and additional staff members who have been integral in preparing the specific plan.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Ms. Pravetti, one comment I do want to make is that I want to be certain that we all understand we are not talking about any developer's specific application or any particular plan. This is the town's view as worked through by this North 40 Advisory Committee. And so I just want to make sure we all understand that.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, so who would like to begin? Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is just a housekeeping note. Today, the Historic Preservation Committee met, and in reviewing the policy, which was quoted on page 9, we just saw on the screen, the committee voted, I think unanimously, that the language, to the extent feasible, was not the intention. How it got there, we're sure we may have misspoke. In any event, today it was, insofar as it's relevant, the Historic Preservation Committee's position is it should say the North 40 development should, at a minimum, et cetera. So I just call that to everybody's attention. Obviously, the words "to the extent feasible" simply suggested we were not making a strong recommendation, and everything is to the extent feasible, but that is not our recommendation.
So that I understand, Commissioner O'Donnell, what you're saying is that the Historic Preservation Committee wants the structures saved.
Yes, we understand that that committee can only recommend, but the recommendation is that, not to the extent feasible. It is a solid recommendation.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Sayak, you want to begin?
Sure.
A lot of my questions are grouped in clusters, so I'll just start with more administrative, and because I know you want to make sure that we all have adequate time to answer questions.
Correct. And so the administrative, and then we're going to look at specific plan first, and then questions on the EIR second.
Okay.
All right?
One was process. Disclosure that I was part of the North 40 Advisory Committee, so that I have been involved in several of the conversations that have been taking place with regard to this draft plan. There were four directions that we had asked that they pursue and bring back to the Planning Commission. The fourth one, with the specific communication with the school districts, just want to clarify that was with both school districts that are that North 40 represents, correct?
Correct. So we reached out to the superintendents of both the high school district and the Union School District. We've heard back from the Union School District. We haven't heard back yet from the high school district.
And what about the northern portion? Isn't that Campbell School District?
We did not reach out to Campbell, but if that's something the commission would like us to do, then we can do that as we move forward through the process.
I do recall, I think I specifically had asked for that. So if that could be done, that would be appreciated. And the meeting that staff will have with the school districts, if you could let us know when that would be, so that should there be anyone that would like to participate, would that be a public meeting?
That will not be a public meeting.
Okay. Well, could you at least request a meeting with the two districts? I guess the three, the Los Gatos Union, Los Gatos Saratoga High School, and the Campbell.
Right. And there's, I think, two Campbells actually,
Campbells.
so we'll reach out to them as well.
Okay. That's it for administrative.
All right. Commissioner Talisper?
I wanted to have a follow-up regarding the historic, since it was brought up. And that is, there were a number of buildings that were identified in our staff report as being looked at to be saved. So my question to you is, does the state Office of Historic Resources, I think there is one, do they grant any, how do I want to say it, concessions with regard to, revitalizing or renovating these buildings at all?
The State Office of Historic Preservation does not have any monetary incentives that are available. Should any of the properties qualify for landmark status, they may be eligible for entering a Mills Act contract for property tax reduction, but that's a separate process.
So there are no other concessions as far, I can't even imagine, but no. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sayak, go ahead.
I have questions regarding circulation, just general broad overview. The first is that, was there any alternatives to the circulation pattern that was considered under the draft EIR?
The circulation that was evaluated was the circulation that was proposed in the specific plan at the time. That's the EIR is evaluating that. There have been other, I think, not included in the EIR, but there have been some studies that have looked at, well, if this doesn't work, is there some other option that may work? And so one of those was addressed as a future study should the Burton Road, for instance, not come to fruition, as the northern portion has a lot of different property owners. If there were other configurations that the commission wanted to have evaluated, then generally, as would be with a project as it came forward, if it proposed something different than what was evaluated in the EIR, then we would look to see if that triggers any new significant impacts that may require subsequent supplemental or an addendum to the EIR itself.
Okay. And then one more question on circulation. When looking at specifically Lark Avenue, the multimodal, when was the decision made to look at Class 1 multimodal versus Class 2? The reason why I ask is specifically in the general plan, we identify Lark and Los Gatos Boulevard as a future place for Class 2. And so the question is, when looking at the circulation, how did that decision come about?
Well, I think that you might remember the multimodal path instead of an actual bike lane was discussed at the advisory committee,
Right.
and it was determined that a multimodal path was the best avenue to explore at this time. But there's also noted that there is right-of-way within the existing proposed right-of-way that would allow future striping of a bike lane on Lark itself.
And so with that, the right-of-way, if you could just explain that process to me, that would be, who obtains the right-of-way? We would, the town, or is that right-of-way for the parcel
So for Lark specifically, they're required to dedicate right-of-way on Lark Avenue.
on Lark Avenue? Okay.
And so there is also future dedications on the boulevard that will have to happen as well. They're not required specifically of the specific plan, but you'll notice on the east side with some of the newer developments and some older developments where it ducks in for 50-plus feet in front of some of the newer buildings. That's the ultimate plan line for Los Gatos Boulevard. So those properties, as they come through and redevelop, they will be required to dedicate that right-of-way prior to being completed from a construction perspective.
Commissioner Bondami?
I have a question with the residential unmet needs, and that is, can we include wording in the plan for a designated senior community as a standard to guarantee that these needs are met?
I think the commission's free to recommend any additional language that they think is appropriate for the specific plan.
I would recommend that. Thank you.
Commissioner Talasfor?
Thank you. Getting back to the traffic, in looking at the general plan, the specific plan, I saw some, when I was reviewing it, I saw some inconsistencies with the general plan transportation element. And it said that there would be streets added on to Lark and Winchester, and that's on, that's in the transportation element of the general plan, the roadway, under roadway improvements. So Lark Avenue would say Winchester Boulevard to Highway 17, widen the road to 4 to 6 lanes with a median and bike lanes. 17, Highway 17 to Los Gatos Boulevard, widen the road to 4 to 6 lanes with a median and bike lanes. And the right turn storage lanes for the metered northbound Highway 17 on-ramp. And then also Los Gatos Boulevard, Lark Avenue to Samaritan Drive, widen the unimproved segments. So is that what you were talking about? And is that, can you explain to me though, it talks about storage lanes, but yeah, how does that work?
Yeah,
Can
so
you
the storage
explain that
lanes
to
for
us?
the on-ramp, I think you mentioned for the, that'd be the northbound 17
Right.
on-ramp. So there's additional storage capacity. That is one of the requirements of the project for the, from the EIR. And I can't remember if it's a requirement for mitigation or if that's something that the town, in conjunction with the general plan language, is requiring. And if Parks and Public Works staff would like to add or include anything additional, if I've left anything out, that's one portion. The Los Gatos Boulevard portion is exactly what I was talking about with that 57 additional feet that's required for dedication as projects come forward, should they
And
look
it's-
for a development on the
sounds
east side of Los
It
Gatos
sounds
Boulevard.
expensive. Who would be paying for that?
So as I mentioned as well, that ultimate expansion is not required by the project. So it's as those projects decide to develop, then once they come in for a development application, the discretionary approval, then that dedication is required.
All right. Perhaps I would like to just ask two overall questions. One is the question about the 30% open space, including hardscape as well. For 44 acres, to only have 13 acres open space and the parking that we're going to require, that seems to me that we're not going to see as much green space as I would hope. So could you address that, Mr. Paulson, and how that could be mitigated or recommended, changed? What is the standard? Is it the 30%?
So currently in the underlying zoning designation of, or general plan designation of mixed-use commercial, there's no open space requirement at all. The other thing I would note is that 30% for the green open space and the hardscape does not include parking lots or roadways.
Okay.
So that's not part of the open space. And that is, one of the provisions. Obviously, those will take up area. And so the remaining area that's not taken up by those roadways and parking lots, it's 30% of that area. So the 13.2 is really just a gross number if you take the size of the parcels that exist today, but doesn't take into account the parking lot potential and or roadway potential.
I'll probably have a follow-up question to that, but let me just get to my second question because I've asked it in the past, so I'll ask it again. We have 44 acres. We're concerned that we're going to have more children than our schools can currently accommodate. And yet, as I read the report, it says that this land is not large enough to accommodate a school. And so perhaps yourself or one of the consultants can walk us through why we couldn't put an additional elementary school on that land.
I don't know that it's you can't. You could request that the plan be modified to include a school. The school capacity issues are technically addressed by SB 50 as is illustrated in the environmental impact report. To take a portion of this property and put the burden of an existing school issue on 364 houses may be considered not appropriate. But that is definitely something the commission could offer up as, if they felt that that was something that the plan should include, or at least include the option for, then that's something that could be part of the recommendation.
Well, I have a couple more questions, but I'll go back to my fellow commissioners. And Commissioner Tallis, before you want to follow up on that.
I do, on the open space. So the 13 acres, I was curious as to where that was called out, and now I'm understanding it's not, because I was looking at the vision statement and the guiding principles, and they make a really big case for the fact that this was agricultural, and to preserve that resource as much as possible. And now I'm hearing from you that we would be counting plazas and landscape parking strips between whatever as some open space. And I consider that landscaping. I don't consider that the kind of open space that this town has been used to, or that is reflected in the general plan, or like I said, in the vision statement or the principles that I've just read. And so I want to know, we could also, I suppose, as a planning commission, make that more specific.
Of course, or you could, if you think there's another number that makes more sense from your perspective, as with any of the requirements, you're free to make that part of your recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell and then Commissioner Bondami.
Could we have the town attorney comment on what you can require of a development insofar as parks, schools, et cetera? As I recall, there are a number of cases on that, the extent of what you can require.
No, I'm not aware of any set requirement. That's up to you to decide and make that
Doesn't there have to be
recommendation.
some nexus with the development and what you
Absolutely.
require?
Absolutely, there's a
Require a
nexus.
school that serves 2,000 children and you have 40, that probably isn't going to fly, right?
Correct. If
Thank
you're
you.
talking about the nexus for, I was looking at it more as to the specific development, though, and how much open space is on that development.
Commissioner Bondami.
In a town that values open space, for the residential, we're maximizing square footage for private open space to 200 square feet. Can we include wording for a CUP to expand that?
You can. That was a big discussion at the advisory committee, and the point was not to create larger yard areas that may be more conducive to a family environment, but to, in an attempt to meet the unmet needs, to limit those spaces. I'm not sure if Commissioner Sayak has any additional input, but I think that was the impetus for making those maximums rather than typically their minimums.
Okay, and one more question, if I may. If the intent is to reduce the school impact, why was consideration not given to limiting all residential units to 1,200 square feet instead of just the single-family homes?
I don't think we looked at every possible scenario. The 1,200 square feet discussion with the cottage cluster, I think it's called, single-family use, was something that was fresh in the minds of many of the advisory committee members, because that was something that was discussed as part of the housing element update and the affordable housing overlay zone guidelines specifically. So I think that's where that number came from. There was not a specific limitation per se discussed with other product types that were also included in the specific plan.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Talisper.
Just one general question. In the staff report on page 4, before we start anymore, I wanted to ask, it's after reviewing and commenting on October 2013 screen check draft of the North 40 specific plan, the advisory committee concluded its work and it was dissolved. The committee did not formally recommend the specific plan. So I'm curious, because I don't know, I attended some of the meetings as an observer, but I'm curious to know what were the reasons that they did not formally recommend the specific plan. And I know that we have 2 people here tonight that served on that committee, and maybe they could let us know if they remember.
We have one person who served on it. The other person who served on it's not here this evening.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Charles was the other member who was
I
on
thought
that.
Margaret.
So when they, looked at that on the October meeting, and hopefully Commissioner Sayak will correct me anywhere I might misstep, but there was a lot of information that wasn't going to be coming until after the environmental impact report analysis was completed. And so, and additionally, obviously, with a group that size and with varying interpretations of various elements, there wasn't always consensus. And so they decided to move the specific plan forward with a number of recommendations that they also made, which are now included in the current draft. And then push some of the big picture items to the commission and or council for further consideration. If RRM or Mariko have anything additional, that's generally, I think, where we landed in October.
Through the chair, just to answer the question, that is correct. There were several large studies that were required before the majority of the committee felt comfortable making an overall recommendation. Those are all before us now: the traffic impact study, the urban decay analysis, and the EIR, and also the 4 questions that were called out in the staff report with regarding to phasing and conversations with the school district. And lots of discussion, definitely, which I'm happy to answer, but I could do that when we're having deliberations.
All right, thank you. Then I have a couple more questions, Mr. Paulson, and that is, the report did discuss the thought of a bike or pedestrian connection to the Los Gatos Trail. Can you walk me through that decision-making? That is it still a feasibility, a possibility? And if so, who would pay for it?
It's a multifaceted question. I think it's always possible. The immediate stumbling block is the Highway 17 bridge, but there are, whether or not future members or decision makers at Caltrans might accept other alternatives, and or whether or not the Planning Commission decides that, we at least want to leave that option open. If it's not on Lark over the bridge, are there other options? And so whether that's policy language, looking at basically enhancing kind of the bike ped policies or language that are currently in the specific plan to add that so that it doesn't get lost as this moves forward, over the years as it's developed, so that should an opportunity come up, whether on Lark or some other option, then that's something that can be added as part of the recommendation. I think there's a number of ways, whether that's something the town ultimately gets involved with Caltrans, or that's something that is developer town, because Caltrans is going to be involved either way, because you're either going to go on the bridge or you're going to go beside the bridge, or there's going to be some other pedestrian crossing, potentially elevated pedestrian crossing over 17. And so Caltrans will be an integral part in that. The town's always interested in trying to improve bike and ped circulation. And so if there's some additional policy language that the commission feels should be added, then we can add additional policy language specifically addressing, not closing the door on future ped bike improvements for basically for gaining access to the creek trail as a major artery that kind of facilitates those movements throughout the town as a whole.
That's exactly where I was going with that. Is that something that typically would be part of impact fees? Oh,
I'm going to turn to Mr. Morley, the Parks and Public Works Director.
Good evening, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. Theoretically, it could be part of the impact fees. However, there is not a project that's currently listed in the general plan or the 5-year CIP that includes a pedestrian crossing there. So it's not currently figured into the calculations for impact fees.
all right. But it could be in.
It could be included in future 5-year capital improvement programs.
Yes. All right. And then my last question is about this working orchard. And I connect the working orchard to the historic preservation. And what I read was that the trees were not the original trees. And so it didn't seem to me that there was a real heartfelt connection to this working orchard. So I'm just going to ask you to take me through the thought process of what would happen to the working orchard in the big picture. It sounds like those plants, those apricot trees would go in different spots, which doesn't make it an orchard to me.
Sure, and I think that some of that is helped by the Historic Preservation Committee's recommendation, which specifically calls for some portion to be used, and I can't remember the exact terminology, I can bring it up, but it had to do with the working orchard. So it's not just a token line of trees along the boulevard or Lark. And so, a lot of times in those instances, developers will plant fruit trees, but they'll be fruitless because it's, an impact from a maintenance perspective generally to have to care for and maintain those. But I think what comes forward is, knowing the agricultural heritage of the site. As developers come forward, they'll need to show how they feel they're meeting that portion of the agricultural heritage that currently exists today as they move forward in future development of the site.
And so is that in all phases?
That will be a question ultimately for the Planning Commission as projects come through. With various property owners, it's hard to say when things will come through and how quickly subsequent phases may come on board following any first phases. But that's something that would have to be discussed and evaluated as individual projects came through.
Okay, I just don't want to lose sight of that, so thank you. Yes, Commissioner Sayak.
Just three more. The first, with regard to the infrastructure, on the specific plan, Chapter 5-4, it talks about drainage system. There's going to be existing deficiencies that will need to be oversized, but not. So if there, and it talks about that it's not necessarily caused by the specific plan area. When it's identified there'll be some deficiencies, who ultimately is responsible for taking care of those deficiencies?
Well, the issue with the deficiency, and I'll turn around to the Parks and Public Works Director if I misspeak, is the existing situation as it is right now without any new development is deficient. And so it's not the fault of the specific plan development that is creating the deficiency. It's already currently deficient. And so what they will do is, as they're improving the infrastructure, and again, after I make this statement, I'll turn back to Parks and Public Works, but they'll size it to an appropriate level, which will both accommodate the specific plan area development as well as remedy the current deficiency.
Okay, I see a nodding there. along those same lines, it talks about the 100-year event flood control protection and that there's different ways to address it. Are those issues to be discussed now and resolved now, or are those issues discussed and resolved as applications come forward?
I'll turn to Parks and Public Works for that.
So it looks like the flood 100-year flood issues have been addressed in the document. I think we're good on those.
Okay.
Staff's reviewed it and staff's comfortable.
With what is currently in the specific plan?
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question, and I'm going to ask our legal counsel, and it's in response to the chair's initial question on SB 50. We did have several discussions at the advisory committee about siting specifically of a school, and I know there was discussion on legal advice given, and it was before your time, your predecessor, about we could show a school to be placed there, but if a school does not buy that plot within a certain amount of time, it would be considered a taking, and so there was that legal risk of siting. And if you would like to expand on that, just in anticipation of other questions that we may hear.
Probably not expand on it, but yes, I mean, you're certainly, if you were going to designate an area within this property for a school, as was mentioned, you've got to find the nexus between that and the impact from this development by itself, not because of other development has caused this increase in enrollment, because this specific project required that additional school to have it on site. So it would create other issues besides the fact of a taking on whether we can make the findings of this specific project requiring additional school on site.
And then a follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Yes, please.
There was no specific discussion on how much time was necessary for this property to be bought by the school district. Are there any?
You have to look that up. I don't
Okay.
know offhand.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bondami?
In regard to heights, the general plan is very specific on height requirements, but the North 40 specific plan, it leaves a lot of flexibility. It's not very specific with height exceptions. So for example, how would we define the parameters of a view corridor?
I think that's going to be part of the evaluation as architecture and site project development projects come through before the Planning Commission. The view corridors, obviously some of that is, well, not obviously, but some of that is a gray area in nature. So one person might think a corridor of X feet's reasonable, someone else might want a wider corridor, or taking into consideration where that view corridor is, where the actual view is accessible from, whether it's got to be 360 degrees or it's, dispersed through the site, and so you still get views of the surrounding hillsides that are currently visible while you're on the site. So if the commission is interested in adding additional language for whether it's height or view corridor considerations, if there's some specific parameters you have in mind, then obviously that can be part of your recommendation. But that will really be, as it is with virtually every architecture and site project that comes before you, whether it's a single family home blocking a portion of view or it's a commercial building. And so those are generally items that are evaluated during the architecture and site application process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Talasfor.
I have a question regarding, so we have a specific plan, but I want to know, I think I know the answer, but if a developer came in and wanted to apply under a PD, plan development, what takes precedence?
The specific plan. As the specific plan is set up, it is set up to be processed as an architecture and site approval application. Should someone want to do something that is not allowed by the specific plan, then they would have to amend the specific plan.
Okay, but that could be done I mean, they could.
Of course, with any application, someone can apply for amendment, whether that's a plan development, an architecture and site application, or a specific plan. And the specific plan has kind of the general triggers for amendments in Chapter 6. And so those would be the general triggers for amending that. But, if there is some interpretation ability from a use perspective, and if there's conflict between the existing zoning code and the specific plan, where the specific plan may be silent on an issue, then there's also implementation matters there. And I'd turn to Ms. Pravetti to add additional input.
Thank you. The benefit of doing a specific plan is that it does provide clear direction for private development. And in this case, the idea is that there would be no need for plan development or other zoning. So with this package of items, should the town council approve them with your recommendation, zoning code amendments would be made, and essentially the zoning rules for the North 40 would be established and would then be needed to be followed through the architecture and site approval process. So it is not contemplated that plan development zonings would be at all needed in this instance.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bondami?
Without a request for a CUP to go through the town process, how can we be certain that the North 40 will address commercial unmet needs when the owner decides to tenant?
That's a great question. Not sure I have a specific answer, and some of that will also depend on as those projects come forward. Some people, they may have some tenants already lined up, or they may have portions of the building leased up, and so as those commercial uses come forward, that is something that we'll have to evaluate. But I'm not sure that we're going to know all the tenants as we move forward for the various phases for the projects as they come forward.
And if I may, Madam Chair, the other option that is before the Planning Commission is, to the extent that with your great knowledge of the town, if there are already known unmet needs in this portion of the community and you would like to make sure that from a policy perspective they are called out. So, for example, staff has heard from the community interest in additional sit-down restaurants, that sort of thing. So, it's certainly possible to start to identify certain categories of use, so that way it's clear to future development what we mean by unmet needs today.
But we can't ask for a certain percentage to be restaurants.
Specific plans could include percentages if that is the will of the Planning Commission and ultimately the Town Council.
Okay, and following up on that, that would also include the maybe the senior citizen community
Yes.
units. Yes. Thank you.
If I might ask a question about on page 2-10 of the specific plan draft, in table 2-2, there is under the notes, the second paragraph says the projects cannot exceed the maximum traffic capacity evaluated in the EIR. And as we're talking about retail, how are we going to anticipate the impact if we have expanded this retail trade area, the RTA? How are we going to anticipate the traffic? How was that calculated, decided?
So the traffic was analyzed, through a traffic impact analysis, and so that had specific parameters as far as the types of uses and the number of chips generated by those. So it's going to be incumbent on staff as applications come through that those are kept track of, so that should a use come in that would exceed what was studied in the EIR, then staff would have to determine whether or not additional CEQA analysis was necessary before that use could go in.
So the developer or tenant could be required to have another traffic study?
That is true.
All right. Okay, thank you. And Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have a question on height. Section 2.6.6 of the specific plan, which is 2-25, talks about the maximum height of any non-residential or mixed-use residential as being 35 feet, with, however, some exceptions. And could you refresh my recollection as to, does the general plan now permit, I remember we went through this before recently. The general plan provides for 35 feet, if I recall correctly. And I'm trying to get into the exceptions. Are these exceptions up to 45 feet under certain circumstances, will they require, in the council's adoption upon our recommendation, is this permitted pursuant to the specific plan or pursuant to the general plan as it now exists?
Well, the specific plan needs to be consistent with the general plan. As you're aware, the council, through the Planning Commission's recommendation, has the task to interpret general plan policy and then make decisions based on that. So as proposed projects come forward and they're requesting a height exception, I will say that there is one zone in town where 45 feet is the maximum height, and that is in the C2 zone, so the downtown. But for any height above those, that will have to be evaluated as the specific project comes through, and that will be part of the evaluation for the commission and or potentially ultimately the council.
Or perhaps I misremember. When we recently went above 35 feet on office buildings, I thought it was because it was a plan unit development. And this is not a plan unit development, and therefore the plan unit development has its own language, and that's how it's permitted. And I'm just wondering why this would be permitted in this zoning is because of this enabling language that we're being asked to recommend.
It leaves that possibility open in a similar way because a specific plan can set different parameters from the zoning code and or general plan. It's just the overall consistency must be in place before a specific plan can be adopted.
I just don't understand how it's consistent if the maximum level is 35 feet unless there is a plan unit development and I guess, I'm not sure, but if I recall correctly, conditional use permit. So when we talk about being consistent, if one looks at the general plan, you see 35 feet. And then you look for exceptions, none of which are here. And we're being asked to recommend the specific plan, the EIR, zoning changes, general plan changes. And I'm just trying to get at, if we didn't adopt, let's say, the general plan changes, would the 45 feet still be permitted?
The general plan changes are strictly text amendments. The general plan overlay has already been approved with the general plan update that was approved in 2010. I'm not sure if Ms. Pravetti has any additional comments on
well, I'm just saying,
the height.
I remember 2010, but I'm just saying we just did this in 2013 and 14, and that required what I just told you. So assuming for the moment this is not that, and yet we're saying we can do that, I assume that I made the assumption it depended upon the adoption of these recommendations, but you're saying no?
Yeah. Madam Chair, if I may, Commissioner O'Donnell raises a good point, and we will take a closer look to see if additional general plan amendments might be needed to ensure that more specific consistency that you're referencing.
If I could draw you back, Mr. Paulson, to the retail space. And specifically on page 2-26, it indicates that the commercial is meant to serve the unmet needs for the new and surrounding businesses and the residential neighborhoods. And yet, we are not being asked, or there will not be CUPs for these tenants. 2-26 of the specific plan. I think. See where it says retail tenant space size?
Yes.
In another part of the report, and I'm sorry I meant to flag it, but I didn't, it talked about 10,000 square feet as the minimum space, and here it says 50,000 square feet as the maximum space. Did I misread that?
I think there was something in the EIR that spoke about the town is lacking in spaces 10,000 square feet or greater. That is one of the big components. And specifically downtown, during the advisory committee discussions, there was talk that there are very few spaces that are over 3,000 or 5. I can't remember what the number was. But as you get on the boulevard, there are some larger spaces, but that, greater than 10,000 square foot combination, there just isn't a whole lot of those size tenant spaces in the town currently.
So we are not requiring a minimum of 10,000. We're just saying the maximum of 50,000. I just want to be
That's correct.
really clear about that. But no tenant, including restaurants that have alcohol use, would be required to come before us for a CUP?
Let me double check the table.
What page is he looking on?
I'm on 2.
Yeah, but what page?
Oh, yeah, I know. You're going to tell us what page you're on.
So I'm on 2-7 currently.
2-7.
And currently, if you look at the, any establishment selling alcohol beverages for consumption off premises, a CUP. If it's in conjunction with the restaurants, then it requires a CUP. Actually, it's permitted use in conjunction with the restaurant. So no, none of those would require a CUP. But if you're selling alcohol for off-site consumption, then that would require a CUP. So you are correct. Restaurant with alcohol would not require a CUP.
Since that is in direct contradiction, is it not, to town code now?
That is different than town code.
Right, so we would want to recommend that that particular portion be changed.
You can recommend that. This is another item. This whole table was of lengthy discussions of what should be permitted versus requiring a CUP and the advisory committee. This is where the advisory committee landed, but if the commission feels differently, then that is definitely can be part of the recommendation.
On the same chart, could you, I was perplexed why a drive-up window business except for a restaurant would require a CUP, except for a restaurant.
It's excluding restaurants. The intent is that you're not allowed to have drive-up restaurants, so maybe we can make that clearer.
Please.
Because currently we do not allow drive-up restaurants in town.
I know, but reading this, it made me think that maybe there was a possibility that one of our favorite coffee chains might end up with a express drive-through. So let's make a note that if that's the intent, and we make that clear. All right. Commissioner Bondami?
In reading the urban decay report, it appears to address the North 40 as a regional center. So are we to consider the North 40 a regional center like Santana Row or a small neighborhood serving center, especially with the larger footprints?
I don't know if a representative from BAE is here, but if Mr. James can answer that question.
All right. The urban decay analysis was
Excuse me, Mr. James, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. Richard James, EMC Planning Group in Monterey, and EIR consultant. And BAE Economics prepared the urban decay study, and it was their opinion that regardless of what the intent of the shopping center was, they filled a 10-minute drive period plus the surrounding zip code areas as far as up into the hills and out into the smaller towns without any services was probably the appropriate way to study the effects of the proposed project. So, in their opinion, there would be a draw from outside the town, just as there is for downtown.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, I think we have caught up with the initial questions for the Planning Commission. And applicant folks, sit tight, and we're going to call the speakers. Now, I see many people out there, and I don't see as many cards. So if you intend to speak, please just bring it forward and give it to a staff member. I thought so. Okay. I'll take it. Thank you. There we go. Mr. Pacheco, thank you. All right, that makes a little difference. So, and even those who have not submitted a card, if you decide that you want to speak, you can, during this proceeding, just bring the card up, pass it to my right, and it will come up here to the pile. Again, I'm going to call the first name, but then I'm going to call 2 additional names. I should have asked you ahead of time, if you have a difficult to pronounce name and you haven't submitted your card yet, please write it phonetically for me, or else forgive me ahead of time for what I might do to your name. But I think we'll get you up here. So the first speaker will be Larry Arze, followed by Laura Murphy Wilkins, followed by Bill Hirschman. Welcome, Mr. Arze, and I know you know the drill here.
Yes,
Thank
I'm
you.
Larry Arze. I live in Los Gatos, and I'm going to talk primarily, but a little else on the North 40, primarily about the appendix financial report.
Mr. Arze, could you just pull that microphone a little closer to you?
Gee, I've never been asked that. I'm usually loud. That was a joke. The appendix to the North 40 is the most bizarre I've ever read, if not cavalier. The report is biased to today's metropolitan way of thinking. It is the antithesis of what we have worked hard to accomplish as a small town. It suggests there is room for more restaurants downtown without offering real parking solutions. For this, it suggests we do better signage directing cars to the parking lots. It suggests we electronically mark every parking space in town to let them know where that one empty space is. It even suggests there is more space for retailers to open up after they have been taught to be in business. But at over $4.50 a square foot for rent, I doubt an independent entrepreneur can make a profit. But I predict we will lose our nationals downtown to the North 40, and rents will again be viable for small business. The report suggests a non-compete agreement with the developer would keep the baby boxes in town. Who in the right mind would believe that? After not identifying that it is the council and staff's fault for the over-intensification of the central business district, it goes on to say that we should do the same thing to our residential districts. Can you believe the audacity of that? To meet the ever-ending demand for housing. I stopped reading the report at this point, as I have horrible nightmares when I read horror stories. So I'll move on to the North 40 plan. Residential should not be adjacent to Lark Avenue, just as it is not adjacent to the boulevard. There is not enough housing facing Lark Avenue to rationalize this. Lark Avenue in its entirety has but a few houses on it. Adding more is bad planning. Housing on Lark Avenue should be set back into the North 40 further. The placement on Lark is primarily for the benefit of the developer. Our staff knows this, and in their coziness with them is acquiescing to the town for financial benefits instead of the town needs.
And now, Laura Murphy Wilkins.
Hi, my name is Laura Murphy Wilkins, and I have children attending Daves Avenue Elementary and Fisher Middle School. I am extremely concerned about the impact this proposed development will have on the quality of education the school districts in our town can provide, as well as the traffic impacts to the community. I know our Los Gatos Union School District will not have capacities for these students. I've read the town's explanation that SB 50 states the town cannot ask the developers to fund a new school facility, provide land, or even fund additional capacity or teachers beyond the predetermined developer's fee. But I ask you, where will the funds come for a new school? When we went to renew the Union School District's parcel tax for the elementary and middle school district, the community polling showed that the community did not support an increase in the tax. Despite significant increases in funding needed by our district, the parcel tax was extended at the exact same amount per parcel as was approved 5 years ago. The Los Gatos Education Foundation has been unable to raise its funding goal this year. It has been told in 2015, though, that it has, because of increased student capacity, it will need to raise additional funding to fund music teachers and other programs. The district has also approved a technology plan that requires significant additional funding every year from the parents and community. Our district is still so impacted financially that it cannot fund our music program or technology purchases. And if we even ignore the millions we need for a new school and further overcrowd our existing school, who is going to fund the new teachers, counselors, and new administrators needed for these new students? Even with our LGF and Home and School Club funding, our district funding is projected to spend less per student than any other district in our area. Without the ability to fund these new needs required by this new development, our students are stuck in more overcrowded classrooms with ever higher teacher-student ratios and the elimination of any non-core curriculum that today earns our district its high-quality reputation. There will be no premium Los Gatos housing pricing if other districts provide the same or better education for their students. I also fear the load factors assumed are much too low, so the impact to our school districts is severely underestimated. The only reason people will pay a premium for housing in this development on the Los Gatos side is because the purchasers are families with children or the property owners plan to rent to families. I ask that the Planning Commission review the methodology used to estimate load factors to ensure the calculations factored in not only owners with children, but renters with children living in those properties that were used as baselines. I urge you also to place a moratorium on single-family home and condo unit rentals for 5 years to ensure this development's properties are not purchased for investment properties, which will increase the number of families renting in the complex. I also suggest that this property be zoned so children attend Lexington School, which is the only school that is currently planned to have capacity. And also encourage the developers to donate sizable donations to LGF and the Millennium Foundation to help fund the increased needs these students require. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Hirschman?
Good evening. My name is Bill Hirschman. I'm an owner of property in the North 40 and a longtime resident in Los Gatos. I was here in 1999 when we did the specific plan the last time as a result of my development application to build buildings in the North 40. So I've been involved in this process for a very, very long time. And if we fast forward to 2014, some of the questions that are being discussed are very similar to the questions that were discussed in 1999. Chairperson Smith, I think, made the most important point that we can discuss this evening, and that is we are not talking about a specific development plan here. We are talking about a plan that has to live through 14 years, maybe 15 years. The developer, and God bless them for coming forward and pushing something so we can finally get some rules wrapped around this, but they can go away tomorrow morning. We're property owners of the North 40. We can go away tomorrow morning. I can't encourage the commission enough that when you adopt these plans, you've heard me preach in front of you for 14 years how important it is to have a set of rules, but to have those rules be flexible enough so that what you get is a good design, a good product. There's, I've been told, 14 or 15 owners in the North 40 block. You're going to see multiple applications here. It's not going to happen in one fell swoop. Now, do I believe what you know, the developer, how can any of us ignore what you've seen? We can't kid ourselves that there hasn't been a layout done, but you have to focus on what makes sense for the entire piece of property. Don't box yourself into situations where you can't make good design decisions. We talked about height tonight. There's going to be varying issues relative to height. You talked about residential versus commercial versus, these conversations have been going on for 15 years. leave yourself the flexibility to make good planning decisions. I'm going to run out of time. I want to move on to the infrastructure. We talked a little bit about infrastructure tonight, but what everybody in front of me and behind me needs to understand that somebody's got to step up and do that. And it's not going to be a little guy like me who owns a few parcels in the North 40. It's going to take a substantial group to get that ball rolling. You need to take that into account when you start talking about how decisions like that are made. I'd be happy to continue, but I know I have my minutes. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to speak. Thank you.
Any questions? Mr. Hirschman.
Mr. Hirschman, thank you for your comments. I am concerned about the infrastructure, and if you look at the technical studies, it talks about where there are deficiencies, and one of the larger issues that keeps coming to my mind is who's going to pay for these. And good planning requires that infrastructure comes in first. As a property owner, do you have specific thoughts on the way the document reads, and in terms of any ideas on how to phase only the infrastructure, not the rest, just the infrastructure?
Yeah, I obviously have a vested interest in how that gets done, and
I'd like
this
to
is
hear
a
it.
substantial investment, and I think the town, I speak as a citizen of the town now, is very fortunate to have a development entity that has the capability of doing that. We're not talking about little dollars here. I think it's only fair, however this plays out, that that individual property owners, again, I think there's 15 or so of us, if we're going to get the benefit of that infrastructure, there should be a system set up to be able to participate in the cost of that. You know, would I like to have a gift? Of course I would, but if I traded shoes with the developer, which I sometimes do, that's not fair, and that's not equitable for them. However, they are going to have to step up and do it, because nobody else can. I mean, they're the big dog in the hunt here, and they're going to have to be able to do that, to develop the portion of the property they want. That's very fortunate for the town of Los Gatos, because if it was different, a different situation, I doubt that would ever take place. To answer specifically your question, I have not looked at the specific details of how that could take place, but I think it's an excellent question, something that needs to be addressed. Again, leave yourself some flexibility. Those things can change, during the development process. You haven't seen all the development plans yet. You haven't seen them. You've seen a very big one, but you haven't seen them all.
Mr. Hirschman, I have a question for you, and that is, in your experience, I'm aware of where your buildings are on Los Gatos Boulevard, in that they became medical buildings, and they evolved into that. Let me put it that way. When we talk about unmet needs of the community in that part of the world, since your business is in that part of the world, what do you think are the unmet needs?
They change over time. I'm going to sound like a broken record. That's why you need to leave yourself some flexibility here. Just in the years that we, owned, we condominiumized the building. So to answer your question, 2 years ago, we condominiumized the building, and so now there's individual owners of 11, office condos within the building, us being one of them. But it's not all medical. There's some retail use in there. The edible arrangements is there. There's a hair salon there. We're there. There's several medical as well. The medical community, as you well know, you've approved the projects, is growing along Los Gatos Boulevard. I frankly think it's a good thing. I mean, it's a very good use. They're bringing a very high caliber of development to the community. It will also attract the restaurants, and I think it's a very good complement to what you're looking at as the development of the North 40. However, things change over time. The retail market changes over time. We saw it cycle 3 or 4 times in our ownership of the lower. Again, you need to have some flexibility so those things come and go. Our buildings were originally designed for a single tenant. That changes. Things change.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Next speaker will be Maria Risto, followed by Barney Davidge, followed by Matthew Hudis. Please proceed, identify yourself.
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. I want to thank all of you for the hard work that you're doing on this huge, massive, and historic project. There's so many things in the specific plan, and I'm hoping that everybody in the community hits on the important needs and desires. But my big concern I have for the North 40, and you've already hit on it, is the connectivity to the rest of the town. And we have talked about multimodal pathways and how this can connect. What I'm concerned about is that when this is eventually built, we don't have a way for the North 40 to connect across to Albright or to the VTA corridor or to the trail and to the rest of town. And I and a few other people have met with several town staff members to discuss possibilities. Regardless of what a specific idea is, whether it be a pedestrian bridge north of Lark or if it's some extension on Lark or whether it's bike trails, what I would ask for is very specific language, not just making the connectivity a goal, but to make it a requirement. And somehow this is going to have to fall on the shoulders of the town and regional agencies and all developers in this area. I would like to see traffic mitigation fees, part of them for all developments around there, go toward connectivity with bicycles and pedestrians. Along Lark needs to be safe and accessible so that the North 40 can connect to the schools, to Vasona and Oak Meadow, to downtown, to Campbell. And I feel like right now using words like a goal is not going to get us there. I also have concern that whether it's a pedestrian bridge or whether it's something along Lark, we need to make sure that any development that occurs doesn't preclude one of these possibilities. Whether the answer occurs within 2 years or 20 years, we need to have a vision for some way to connect this and make sure that other developments, either on the other side of Oka or in the North 40, do not stop us from getting some kind of connection. So I would ask you as a planning commission to ask for specific and mandatory language that connectivity be considered and be required, and that the planning commission moves it up to the town council, and the town council and the staff make this a very high priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Barney Davidge?
I have handouts. Do I just bring them up to you?
Yes, please. You can pass them up, and we'll pass. Oh, that's fine. Just if you just give them to Commissioner Sayak, she'll continue them. Do you have that on PowerPoint, Mr. Davidge, or just the handouts? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Barney Davidge. I live on Tate Avenue. And I really have not paid much attention to the North 40 until last week someone sent me this document. And I saw the documents. In reviewing, I noticed the site map. So I took the site map and I created a massing study and views from the information provided and to share with you tonight. Because now you can see how massive this project is. Because I believe transparency in 3 dimensions is what we are building is an important information. And I do illustrations, so I'm used to 3D. And I provide you these images knowing that these are maximum heights that are called out on this site map that I got from the document of April 29th, 2014. And in parts of it has heights up to 53 feet. They're indicated on this plan. And this seems more of an urban city solution, not a town. Originally, I was going to stop because I just wanted to provide you with images because that's what I do. But I couldn't help myself. After reviewing the massing model, I realized we could have 3 towns: downtown, uptown, and a new city. The solution for the North 40 is a very urban city solution for our town with no urban transportation systems to support that solution. And the speaker before me, I applaud. But by the way, if you want a solution, you can buy an electric bike that my son's selling. But as a person that believes in our community, how is this plan going to integrate the new city, downtown, and uptown?
Any questions for Mr. Davidge? Thank you very much. Oh, wait, sorry, don't go away. Okay,
Joanne?
Commissioner Talasfor.
Thank you. I do have a question. Thank you for this, by the way.
You're welcome.
Because you're absolutely right. Picture's worth 1,000 words. In this case, it was 2,000 pages worth of paper we read, but anyway. So you created this for us, and you have this concern about an urban city solution, and that this almost becomes its own city, which looking at it.
Well, when I look at
would
that
like
image,
that.
it's a city.
That's right.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how would you change it, or what recommendation would you make? Obviously, you've looked at this and studied, and you care about it. So how would you change, or what would you change?
Well, I think the general plan, 35 foot, which the general plan is, would be a nice start to stick with what we've talked about for years, not 45 or 53 feet. I'm not a planner. Clients bring me stuff and I make pretty pictures. And the other is, it just seems like it's not a village. It's not a town. It's dense. You're putting a lot of people in a very small space, especially when you see 35, 45, or 25 is not bad. But, and also I have to, on this, the roof, there's no roof pitches. These are just maximum heights that are called out on this site plan. So anyway, that's what I suggest. Keep with a 35-foot limit and cut out some of the massing, because when you look at it, there isn't a lot of view angles. You can create view angles of the mountains. If you stand at a specific spot, you can see the mountains. And you move back 20 feet, you can't see anything.
Mr. Davidge, don't go away while I ask a question of the commission. Would you like to see this put up on the screen?
Yeah, I
Yes,
think it'd
all
be
right.
really
So,
good.
Mr. Paulson, can someone take care of that?
Thank you.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I really
I tried to
think
get it this morning down to you.
for the benefit of our audience, I'd like everyone to be able to see what we are seeing.
Would you elaborate? Can I just follow up with something else?
Well, I'm just worried that Mr. Paulson might be there and...
This is a report that was emailed to me. This is the massing model of what the project looks like. And then on this document, I've put in the different views. And this is like view 1. View 2. View 3. View 4. View 5. View 6. View 7. This is the open space one. And view 8. Now, an architect, they'll come back and they'll cut the roofs down, because that's just the height.
Mr. Davidge,
ridge height.
just address the commission. Okay, so,
Well, I love the community, I just want to.
okay, all right.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Talasfor, did you have a
I just had
follow-up?
one follow-up. We talked just before this about the view corridors, and you mentioned something about that just now, and I wanted you to just say again what you said, or elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, sometimes in view corridors, if you stand in that exact spot, you'll see a mountain. Then you move back not very far, and you don't see hardly anything.
Mm-hmm.
And what's nice about this model, you can actually stand anywhere you want, and it'll tell you what you're. Will tell you what you're seeing. So if you say, I want to know what it looks like standing at right at area A, looking north, what will I see? It'll do it. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Davidge, thank you very much. and Matthew Hudis. Behind Mr. Hudis will be Wendy Baker, Don Capor-Bres. Okay, thank you.
Matthew Hudis, Madrone Avenue, Los Gatos. As a resident, I'm deeply involved in the thought process for the North 40. Been involved on the committee for a couple of years, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide input to the process that the Planning Commission is now embarking on. I think it's unfortunate that we, the public, only have 3 minutes to comment on 298 pages of EIR comments that were provided only 48 hours ago. I think that's a significant issue in terms of being able to address this, particularly since inputs on the schools, economic and urban decay have significant impacts that I believe are not recognized properly and have not been mitigated. Why are we at this point? This is essentially the process that we followed, which was coming from the general plan, the advisory committee draft a specific plan, then have an EIR prepared, and then have comments, and then move toward adoption. This is the process that's recommended by the state, and that is to conduct the EIR in parallel with the development of the specific plan for the reasons that they state. This did not happen. So what can we do about it? And the magnitude of this is that there are 35 letters with 210 comments that have come not addressed in the EIR that accompanies the plan. While I supported the plan, it was with the assumption that analysis would be done and that analysis would be incorporated in the plan. So given that we are in this situation, I think there are some options, which I think you all know probably better than I do, the options that the Planning Commission has. One is to send the EIR back to the staff, consultants, to adequately address the inputs, and these are not exclusive of each other, they could be combined, to hold hearings individually on the concerns that have been raised, such as schools, transportation, economics, and land use, to incorporate controls in the plan, such as CUP or tables of use that were considered by the committee but were not incorporated because the analysis had not been done, or to reject the plan as it is, ask the council to reactivate the advisory committee to consider the concerns that have been raised along.
Thank you, sir. Your time is up, and I am going to call Commissioner Sayak, but before I do that, I do want to personally acknowledge you and the comments that you have made in the report, the written comments. They were very extensive, and I want to assure you that the committee members, commission members did receive those and read them, and I certainly appreciated the effort that you went through to make these detailed comments. So now I'm going to have a question.
Yes, and I do want to echo what Chair Smith had said. I appreciate not only your comments, but your coming forward to discuss them, because I do have several questions. The first is, well, first I want to give credit that the urban decay analysis, it was very much your strong urging that this be considered as part of this information that's being transmitted. What's unclear to me is the genesis was, how do we find a model or some analysis that will help us, that will help guide what type of retail, whether it's square footage, pads, types of retail, that would complement versus hurt downtown? That was the genesis of this whole discussion. I don't feel that I have that based on what I have here. So is that because the urban decay analysis you're considering is of a different study, or is it just the data that was used is different, or a combination, or something that's not here? If you
Sure.
could just kind of...
Yeah, two things with regard to that. Number one, The data that was in there was good. The analysis and interpretation, I believe, was flawed, and I pointed that out in a number of situations. However, with the second point is that a real analysis of the impact on the downtown was not conducted. So, what was done was a good start, but it was not sufficient to really understand the impact on the downtown. So we had statements in there that say that the downtown is thriving, that the downtown will not be impacted by this, yet common sense says if you add the magnitude of stores and restaurants in proximity, it will have an impact. And the analysis did not include that aspect of it, despite my guidance to staff that started 2.5 years ago on how to do that kind of analysis. The consultants that were employed did not do that analysis.
Yes, go ahead.
So could, a lot of it, I think, looking at this and reviewing the data and having the discussion on the North 40 committee was that because the consultants they're outside of Los Gatos, so it's hard to predict how, this is a very simplistic way we had discussed it, but we had talked about how maybe a Chili's wouldn't compete with Manresa because they're of two different magnitudes. Could you ever get into that level of detail in an analysis like this, or is it something that we need to require upon ourselves in a CUP process or something equivalent as we move forward?
I think that some kind of analysis, or in the absence of analysis, some kind of controls are needed. We contemplated some of those controls in the work of the committee, looking at developing tables of uses and percentage allocations. Ultimately, we did not have the information to proceed with that. It was, and the process was changed, frankly. At one point, the process, to be clear, was that the committee would have the benefit of the EIR. That process changed, and we said we would finish the work, and then the EIR would be developed. So there were actually several votes taken by the committee on some of these controls. Some of them made it into the document. Some were supported by a substantial minority but did not make it into the document. But it was all done in the absence of having the analysis that I believe should have been done and should have been started 2 years ago.
Are you completed, Commissioners? Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Commissioner Talasfor?
Thank you. So I just have a follow-up question. You're speaking about consultants. Now, were these consultants experts in retail and marketing, or was this the consultant team that just provided the general direction to you?
Sure. I believe there were two sets of consultants. One set that helped to develop the plan with expertise in developing specific plans, and then some consultants who were tasked with the economic study, the urban decay analysis, which I think is Exhibit K.
And they were outside of the specific plans consultants? Or were
Yes.
they
Now,
on
all
the
of
same
that,
team?
all of that happened after our committee finished. So that's happened between the plan that you have in front of you that was drafted by the committee and the point that we're at today. So I'm suggesting that there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done, should be done, either by this commission or by some other body to incorporate the analysis that has been done and to require that the proper analysis be done in the cases where it's deficient.
Thank you. That's cleared it up for me. Thank you.
Okay.
That's it? Okay, Mr. Hudas, thank you very much. Wendy Baker, followed by Don, followed by Jeff Lockridge.
Madam Chair, if we could request switching the order with Wendy Baker and Don Capobres. Got some coordinated comments, if that would be okay.
Yes, certainly.
Commission, my name is Don Capobres. I'm with Grosvenor Americas. Through a contract we have with the Yuki family, we are one of the 15 property interests on North 40, and I think it's a really important point to make that we are not the only developer on the North 40. There are other property interests to consider. The last time I was in front of this body was January 9th, 2012. It's safe to say that we're in a much different place today than we were that evening. At that time, Grosvenor had taken kind of the front and center role of driving the planning process for the specific plan, and a joint planning commission town council hearing kind of erased that because it really did belong in the town's hands to put the process together for the specific plan. So over the last 2 years, we've been observers of the North 40 Specific Plan Advisory Committee. And even though we ended up in a place that we didn't envision when we came in to Town Hall in 2008, we do think that the Specific Plan Advisory Committee got it right. They've put together a very thoughtful and, more importantly, really balanced plan for the North 40. They're balancing some very, very hard issues, which you've heard tonight. The first issue is balancing the unmet needs on the retail side. I'm in agreement with Mr. Hudis and some other folks that there could be some regulations inserted into the specific plan that make the retail for the North 40 more complementary to downtown and retail in Los Gatos Boulevard. It didn't make it into the plan, but it's something we can work out. And we think we can provide unmet needs on the retail side because shoppers or residents of Los Gatos are leaving town boundaries to buy certain things. The specific plan does a really exciting job on the residential front in focusing on two demographic segments that are growing, the millennials and the empty nesters. And I'm reluctant to say why we focused on those two segments, but it has to do with impacts on schools, and I think the specific plan does a good job in giving direction on that front. I also think that there's unmet needs on the residential side for your regional housing needs assessment for the state that the North 40 can provide. And then finally, in balancing the commercial and residential, I think we found a way to minimize the traffic impacts that are the third component that we've been dealing with for 6 years. And so overall, in wrapping this up, we have put a plan together that interprets all this data, 6 years of knowledge and working with the community, and we think it's a plan that can work. My partner, Wendy Baker from Summerhill, will go through some of the concerns that we might have, but there are not that many. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Don't go away, okay? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Siak.
I do have questions, but it sounds like it might be a coordinated presentation. So if I have residential questions, should I save them for Ms. Baker?
I think that's a good idea. And so mine happens to be about retail. So, okay. So if I could ask the question. Over your span of time, we have seen many changes in the economic landscape. And the downtown did not escape the recession in terms of retail.
Right.
So we talk about retail leakage out of town, which is, you didn't use that term, but basically people spending money buying things that are not available here. Did you do a specific study as to what those needs are? The leakage that's leaving town?
Sure. In 2008, when we first came to town, we do residential, but we're very good retailers. And our main interest on the North 40, because of its proximity on Highway 85 and 17, was retail. And so we've done quite a bit of analysis on the retail side. I'm reluctant to actually mention the name, but there's been a lot of discussion over my 6 years in Los Gatos about comparisons to Santana Row. The location of the North 40 in proximity to other retail establishments in Silicon Valley positions it as a potential killer of Santana Row and other retail establishments in the region. It's one of the best retail locations in the Bay Area. We envisioned probably a larger program from a retail perspective when we first walked into Town Hall, but there's data for sure that justifies why this site is so strong from a retail perspective. And we've done that analysis. And we've worked with the North 40 Advisory Committee over 4 years in trying to share that information with folks. Again, we understand the issues here. We understand we're in a different place. I'm not trying to rewind history, but we do have a lot of analysis on the retail side. And, you know, again, we're willing to work with folks like Mr. Hudis or other folks who are concerned about the downtown issue on finding appropriate regulations on the small square footage spaces where we would primarily impact downtown. The 3,000 and under square footage spaces is the hot spot. But the town doesn't have a lot of spaces above that to offer. If REI were to walk into into town of Los Gatos today, where would they go?
So let me just stop you there and just remind you, because I'm reminded myself, that one of the goals of the committee that they stated was that the retail would be resident serving. And so as you are talking to me and I am thinking about resident serving, and then I'm thinking about 50,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, this is where I'm
right.
Analyzing the situation myself, and bringing up the fact that it's a prime spot for retail draw from outside of the area is not my focus right now. So it's really the residents and the community. So I just want to, I'll make that statement, but I want to go on to questions. So I think any other questions, Commissioner Siak? I could see it in your eyes. Okay.
We talk about residential serving, and I had asked this question during committee discussions. If you are looking at creating a residential neighborhood serving center, doesn't it make sense to site it along Lark Boulevard where there are already existing neighborhoods that have come to us and said they are lacking services? So if you have that existing neighborhoods already, shouldn't that be an area where that center be sited versus north where it currently is against the freeway? And if you could just have your thoughts change since the past 2 years?
Actually, I had a meeting last night that probably solidifies my thoughts on that. I think residential clearly belongs on Lark Avenue because of the residential program, or I'm sorry, the neighborhood that's across the street in Highland Oaks. I think it's an appropriate continuation of the use from across the street to Lark to the north side of Lark on the North 40. One of the difficulties, or the primary difficulty that we have with siting retail on the south side of the site is that, and he did a good job, we don't control the frontage along Los Gatos Boulevard on the south side of the North 40. Mr. Hirschman developed very fine buildings there. And so you don't site retail behind existing buildings where people can't see them from the boulevard or access them. That's a primary reason. The second is, and the north side could be a lot of things. We look at, it's an opportunity to provide maybe even some entertainment up there. And those types of more intense uses belong further away from the existing residential than closer. And so they do feel like they belong at the intersection of the expressways and more intense commercial use up there. And so I don't know how to say this. We've looked from our standpoint, again, this is the town's process. Our development application is not being judged here. But we have put a lot of resources into interpreting the specific plan. And we have looked at the North 40 every which way. I understand people think we're cherry picking because of the Los Gatos school issue. And I've said this, and I've been reprimanded for saying it, but I'll say it today. Move the boundaries. We don't need to be in Los Gatos schools, but as soon as I say that, people will go to Campbell and Cambrian. But as soon as I say that, the conversation stops. And so it is genuinely a pure planning vision why the site plan kind of ends up, we think, correctly the way it does. Again, I'm embarrassed to say it was the first time I've ever been to Highland Oaks and met with the community there. But very clearly there's a vibrant residential neighborhood across the street who doesn't want height or intense use across the street from them.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Baker, do you want to come up now and do your 3 minutes, and we may have questions for you as well.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Baker. I'm with Summerhill Homes, and Summerhill became involved in this project in 2012. There was a massive reset, obviously, when it went from 750 residential units to the 364 contemplated in the plan. And ultimately, Grosvenor as a retailer, they also do more of a condo-style housing, and it started getting into areas that Grosvenor doesn't specialize in, and so they brought Summerhill on as a partner, as well as Eden Housing, who's here tonight as well. And Summerhill is built in Los Gatos, and we're a local developer, and we don't take things just off the shelf, and so we're not here to discuss our product specifically, but we do have some residential expertise that, you know, I may be able to answer questions. And we've watched for the last couple of years, and I'm a nearby resident, and I've watched this process for many years. And the staff, the community, and a 15-member advisory board have been a part of this process. This is not the first meeting. It won't be the last meeting on this. In addition to the staff meetings, there's been dozens and dozens of meetings by Grosvenor and their partners on, you know, between neighbors and so forth, to get people involved in this process. So it's exciting to see everybody here. There's so much thoughtfulness and respect to balancing the unmet needs of the housing and unmet needs of the commercial in this town, and it's very complicated, and there was it didn't happen overnight. It is one of the most comprehensive and thorough specific plans that I've ever, and my company has had the opportunity to watch be created, and kudos to all of the people that have been involved. So the result is, although we were talking about it, someone was speaking about a city here, this is actually a village, and it's 364 residential and commercial village. That doesn't generate a city. The images you saw were sugar cube images. They didn't have articulation, they didn't have roof messing, they didn't have trees, they didn't have landscaping, they didn't have any of the things to actually make a village. So I just want to be very cautious as we proceed. With those sorts of images, they can be very scary, but again, we're not talking about specific development applications here. But every conference I attend now and everything that I see, every magazine that I get, they're talking about this village concept. I have just something in front of me that I got just 2 days ago, and on it says a home for everyone. And it talks about housing that welcomes all the generations, particularly these bookend populations, the unmet needs of millennials and move-down buyers. Also tonight, we submitted a letter for the files. I'm sure you saw it. And we talk about a variety of issues in this letter. Some of them are pretty simple. We've already talked about reimbursement agreements for infrastructure, how to figure out lot coverage when you're actually tentative mapping something becomes very complicated. We're recommending you look at it per application. Some of them are a little bit more in depth, such as looking at height from finish grade. Something that, again, that the exercise didn't look at earlier was actually contours of this land, and there's a lot of grade on this property that maybe people don't realize. So thank you for your time. We're here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Yes, Ms. Sack.
Summerhill, you mentioned, has done some developments in town.
Correct.
Do you have any specifically built for this demographic that you're targeting, the millennials and the empty nesters?
Well, it's interesting because I think actually that's why this is being talked about in this industry, is that a lot of people haven't built for this, this population. And so everyone's learning as we've gone along. Los Gatos is really almost ahead of its time in contemplating building for these. People used to look at millennials going into apartments or that type of housing. We're really looking at the opportunity for that 25 to 35-year-old to be able to buy a piece of property. And again, for the move-down buyer, we're not building the move-down product, Grosvenor, so they can speak on that. But for someone that might want to downsize from a house, but isn't necessarily looking to go into a age-restricted community because they want to be surrounded by vibrancy, and they want to be surrounded, again, by other people that aren't necessarily all 62 plus, 65 plus. So we haven't, but what we did do is we put together a focus group of individuals that were between 25 and 35, and we talked about all the things that they were looking for before we even started on product design. And we came up with, it was very interesting, we came up with, it's a lot of stuff that's actually, again, being talked about at conferences, and we were doing this a couple of years ago, and so it's really interesting. But when you go to these conferences and they say, hey, can you give us an example of the type of open space that people like in these communities? What you hear over and over again is, well, we haven't actually built that yet, so we don't know yet. So what we're trying to look at is what our focus groups are saying, things like bocce courts, you know, having areas for big screen TVs so people can watch sporting events outside, fire pits, those sorts of things. A dog park. Dogs are very important for these generations. So has Summerhill in particular designed to this? No, but I'll tell you that Summerhill doesn't ever just take plans off the shelf and reuse them. So we're designing completely differently for this project than what we did for Heritage Grove, for example.
If I could also just do a follow-up question to that. With your focus groups, did you have a focus group locally here? Is that what you were saying?
Right.
For the 25 to 35, did you have them for the downsizers, the 60 plus?
I think Dawn could probably speak on that. My focus group, again, my focus in this is on the millennial buyer. And so my focus group was of Bay Area residents. And the site was specifically, discussed as being a Los Gatos property, but we didn't give them anything. We just said, we have a piece of property in Los Gatos. What are the things that would make you want to live there? And that's actually something that is, some younger generations are flocking more towards urban centers. So then it becomes but there's a lot of things in the South Bay that, tech centers where people work. People don't want that large commute. So my focus group was on the 25 to 35, and I don't know internally in Grosvenor, I'm sure they've done their own marketing research.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Talasfor.
Yes, thank you very much. So millennial and empty nester design, product design.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us what each is? Are
What
they
is that?
different?
Sure.
There's usually 4 walls and et cetera, et cetera. So explain that product type to us.
Sure. Well, for one thing, I think with millennials, clearly there's an affordability component, right? Because this is going to be your first house, and it's going to be probably smaller than, say, your traditional home that you find in Los Gatos. However, 25 to 35, your incomes vary widely. A 25-year-old is making something much different than a 35-year-old would. So there's size as something, which
size meaning larger, smaller.
Again, there's a range, but you want to have an affordability component. So you don't want to have a 4,000 square foot single-family detached home on a large lot. Doesn't meet the millennial buyer needs. Some millennial buyers, perhaps, but not all of them. So you're looking at that. You're looking at design as far as open tread stairs. They're willing to go up multiple floors by foot. They don't need necessarily an elevator. I'm speaking specifically to the millennial. So they are willing to have multi-story homes instead of that traditional one-story ranch. They are looking for gaming space. That's something we heard over and over again. Gaming rooms, lots of flex space. They don't want a dining room. Again, we're not talking project applications, but we don't have dining rooms in any of the plans that we're proposing on this site because they're not looking to have a big Thanksgiving dinner, but they are looking for the ability, if they want to put out a table somewhere to be able to have that. They're looking for a bedroom location. So family buyers want their bedrooms clustered together. A millennial buyer is okay having a bedroom stacked one above each other because one of them actually might be for a roommate, so they might want to be separated by floors. They might want those 2 master suite options. They might have the desire for one of those rooms to be a home office. That generation, as many of us do now, work from home a lot. We even heard in this focus group, people want a bedroom for their dogs because they want to be able to crate them and have a separate space for them where it isn't necessarily the odors of the pet and so forth. So bedroom count is something else that keeps that price point low. Again, we're not talking project applications, but we have a very low bedroom count on our project applications. So you're not talking about 4, 5, 6 bedroom traditional housing here, and the bedroom configurations are different.
But now, can you describe the empty nester product?
Sure.
So Grosvenor's kind of all over where we do operate have done kind of this program, and the concept of an empty nester is someone who's moving out of a very hard to maintain Victorian house, say in the hills, kind of in the large range, 8, 10, however, 10,000 square feet, but still wants to stay in Los Gatos. And so, but they want a low maintenance unit. They still want typically a larger unit than what we're talking about in the millennials. And so it's something that's more on a structured parking, podium, stacked flat, or condominium type program where there might be a doorman or 24/7 concierge so that if they happen to be traveling to go visit their kids back east, they can just lock the door and not worry about security. Again, it's more of a condominium setting, don't need to do a whole lot of maintenance. There's no yards in this case, there are balconies and terraces. The move-down buyer is still looking for more space than the millennials, so instead of, say, 12, 13, 1,400 square feet, we are looking at units that are in the 2,000 square foot range that focuses on entertainment areas, both indoor and outdoor, terrace space. So things like that, with amenities that are more kind of driven towards, I'm getting towards that age, a resort-style living, kind of an active adult type situation.
Okay, the however is that even though you build these, you can't discriminate against or for anyone who buys them. I mean, you can't
Is that a
say-
question, Commissioner
Yeah, it is a
Talesworth?
question.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out how you would, in this setting, the site, discern one product from another,
Is that directed towards?
to both of you.
Right. So, again, we're designing a way, we're designing towards an unmet need of an empty nester, which means we're designing away from a certain thing. So we're not providing yards in our case. So can someone theoretically come in and buy a unit and an empty nester marketed program? Sure. At the price points we're probably looking at, you're probably competing against single family detached somewhere in town, to be honest with you. And if they have a choice to make and they have children, they're going to choose to find someplace that's more suitable to raising a child than in that type of program.
So obviously, I think that the complicated one is to explain as the millennial buyer, because who's to say that this buyer wouldn't put kids into this product type? Again, we're trying to design away from what would be a family-friendly buyer. That's the best we can do for Fair Housing Act and fairness. And we've actually, if you look at, again, some of these plans, and I think people chuckle when we talk about it, some of these bedrooms, for example, have these open showers so that it's more like a hotel in Las Vegas than it is where you'd have your kids running around the plan, seeing you showering. So it's sort of a bizarre thing to talk about, but those are design features that absolutely attract that younger buyer, that hip buyer, the hipsters, that I am not. And clearly, if I said hipster. And I think about myself and when I was in my 1,200 square foot home, I had 2 children, 2 dogs, and eventually we grew out of that home. And it was one story, it wasn't a multi-story 1,200 square foot plan, which actually chops it up more and makes it less amenable to a family buyer. And eventually you grow out, and then the goal is ultimately that these people are growing out and they grow somewhere else in Los Gatos. Average family time in a home is 8 years. We're expecting this to be maybe 5 years because these buyers will grow out of these homes, and that's the idea.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers.
Commissioner Bondami, and who are you directing the question
Probably to Dawn. We're going back to the empty nester. So an empty nester usually is a senior citizen, but I heard you state that you weren't interested in having a designated senior community. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why not?
From our market analysis, and I don't mean to disparage other developers or how other people want to live, but Sun City is not kind of how people want to grow old anymore in general. These age-restricted communities that we believe is not the path forward. We're finding, and what's exciting about where the North 40 Specific Plan Advisory Committee ended up, and we started from, I think the committee started from a very defensive position in focusing on these 2 sectors of the population. But what we find all over, as Wendy alluded to, the industry is now discovering this, is that empty nesters and millennials actually want to hang out together, kind of in a mixed income, mixed age, mixed everything. We believe that a sustainable neighborhood has these different generations in it. And the really cool thing about these 2 populations is that they want to hang out at the same coffee shops. They want to hang out at the same wine bar. And if I can introduce an application item, they want to hang out at Market Hall. And they want to be in vibrant areas. A lot of empty nesters are moving back to big cities. And we're finding that in other markets in big cities that we deal with. And so So that is, that's kind of the way it feels like that these two demographics are going. Maybe there's still room for Florida and people going down to an age-restricted community and kind of living in that style, but the trends are going towards really mixing up these generations, and they're really interested in the vibrancy that's provided by the retail. And it's why it's important to deliver, at the same time residential units are delivered, it's really important to deliver that vibrancy, those shops, those neighborhood-serving retail amenities, because that's where the gathering places are. It used to be in Sun City, they meet a big community center, they have a theater, bowling alley, and things like that. The community center now is a coffee shop. It's where people hang out. And again, we're really excited that kind of the advisory committee came to this, maybe didn't intend to, but they came to it, and now we've potentially the town of Los Gatos potentially has a prototype for how to handle these two demographics in a suburban setting, because it's happening in the cities, but how does it happen in a suburban setting, in a small town setting like Los Gatos? And I think we kind of found it, so.
Well, thank you. Opes, it looks like Commissioner Sayak.
Just one more. Mr. Capobres, you mentioned something that has piqued my interest. You said that you actually mentioned to someone changing the school boundary lines.
If you could just,
I'm just curious. I'm not saying that. Can you elaborate on those discussions and who those discussions were with?
I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but the concept was to try to really ferret out whether or not this was about us cherry-picking residential in the Los Gatos Unified School District, the high school district. We merely suggested, if that is the big issue here on the North 40, why don't we look at moving the boundaries to take us out of Los Gatos and put us in Campbell and Cambrian? It came to a very quick end, that discussion. And it's dangerous to mention it, but I do want to mention it. If someone has any political wherewithal to do that, it's not something we're afraid of, because we're targeting populations who are potentially buying residential units, and I hope there are some kids in the North 40. I really do. I really do. But we're trying to really focus on the bookend demographics. If some families sneak in, that's great. I feel bad about talking about a development that doesn't allow kids in it. It feels strange to me. But to try to prove the point and not look like we were just paying lip service, we made the suggestion. We made it years ago. And there was conversations with all 4 school districts. And none of the boards weighed in on it. So I don't want to put anyone in trouble from a superintendent standpoint. We have legal analysis on how to move the boundaries. We went down that road, and it's not going to work unless someone wants to pull that flag up and run with it. And I don't think anyone does. And I'm not making an idle threat. We tried really hard. We thought that was a solution. We looked at siting a school on the North 40 site because of how it's bisected and because its proximity to the freeway. Siting a school on the North 40 is very difficult as well, because you have 4 school districts kind of right at half court.
All right.
So it's a complicated issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for your testimony. Just so that you can, the audience can plan, we're going to hear from Mr. Lockridge next, and then we will take a 10-minute break. So, Jeff Lockridge.
My name is Jeff Lockridge, 109 Paseo Laura. All of our town documents should be clear and concise. If they're not, then our rules, policies, and ordinances are subject to interpretation. In my experience, shorter sentences make for clearer messages. You may not win any grammar awards for shorter, choppier sentences, but information can be presented much more clearly. Run-on sentences can only lead to confusion. I would suggest bulleted lists rather than run-on comma delineated lists. I would also suggest that a paragraph should ideally have one topic and not slip across 2 or more. This document is more confusing than clear. Tonight's specific plan is a way to further clarify how to apply our town's general plan to the North 40 development. The height of the buildings in the North 40 should be one of those clear pieces of information that needs to be communicated. But in addition to longer than necessary sentences and some punctuation issues, what is missing is what the maximum height allowed really is. This would seem amazingly simple to me to communicate, so I must assume that either it was a mistake to leave it out, or it was done on purpose to allow the developer to decide or interpret. The basic height limitation seems to be set at 35 feet. That would be fine if that was the limit, but it's not. Even though an open space penalty is applied for if that height is exceeded, that penalty kicks in if a building is just 36 feet high, 1 foot over the 35-foot limit. That penalty requires that 5% of the building's footprint square footage is added to the development's open space. But what if the building height is, say, 45 feet? Well, nothing changes. No further penalty is assessed. Limited towers, spires, elevators, and mechanical penthouses, cupolas, roof pitches of 8 to 12 or greater, and many others are allowed to exceed that 45-foot penalized height. Further height exceptions are implied to be able to be covered by a conditional use permit. Building height is a land use issue, not a conditional use. Maybe another type of exception is needed here. I would also like to see where these excessively high buildings would be located. This specific plan should definitely include a not-to-exceed overall maximum height, one that is all-inclusive of anything that may be allowed, but not to be exceeded. It may take another run through the specific plan to see if there are any more sections that need a bit more clarity, since it's the only one I could get to, or an editor, or both. And in the few moments that I have left, I would like to also suggest that adding an extra lane to the right turn from Lark south onto Los Gatos Boulevard would improve traffic flow much more than the proposed extra left-hand turn lane north onto Los Gatos Boulevard from Lark. Anyway.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lockridge? Seeing none. We're going to take a 10-minute break, which means we will be back here at approximately 9:25. Thank you. If everyone could take their seats. I know our viewing audience can't see the audience, but it was like having a great town community meeting, wasn't it, out there during our breaks? So, I'm going to continue with the speakers, and I want to call Vicki and Richard Wendell. Are they still here? Okay. And then behind them will be Jack Van Natta, and behind him will be Lee Quintana. Ms. Wendell, just pull that microphone down. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Vicki Wendell, and my husband and I live on Jackson Street. My concern is one that has not been raised, but I am, although I love living in the town of Los Gatos, I have been disturbed by the fact that other communities are doing much more than we are in requiring solar to be incorporated into new developments. And here we have a wonderful opportunity to incorporate solar panels into the buildings. It's not going to happen unless it's required, but it would be a benefit to all of us, not only to the people buying these places, and to the environment, but to the people in our town. We're becoming more and more an electronic society, more computers, more things that need to be plugged in every night, our iPhones, our iPads, and that can, that drain on energy resources can be mitigated a lot by just incorporating solar panels. I taught at the high school. I was the science department chairman when we designed the new science building. Everybody in the science department insisted that that building be designed for solar panels, and it was. So it has complete conduits, it has everything, it's solar ready. But when we got to the end, they said, well, we're short on money, you can have cabinets or you can have solar. And so we have cabinets, we never got the solar. Parking lots in high schools all over Santa Clara County and public buildings have beautiful covered parking with solar panels, which are helping to offset their costs. We have one high school in this town, it does not have that. And I'm thinking, why is this? Do the people in Los Gatos not care about environmental issues? So my urging is, could you please consider adding something to the plan where solar would be incorporated over parking structures, on roofs, public buildings, wherever. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you again. Mr. Van Natta? Do you have a handout for us? All right. And are you going to use the slides, or did I just?
No, that's
all
just
right.
a version of the short speech that I have. It's just to take with you. Though we joke about the specific plan really being the unspecific plan, it is a serious subject to us. There are too many loopholes in it, too many opportunities to become another Albright that ignores the general plan, and unfortunately, the combined projects will be so large that they will overwhelm the north end of town with traffic. Building heights and too much housing equate to more people, and more people equate to more cars in California. We can talk all we want about mass transit, but our own VTA wants to shut down the light rail project on Highway 85 to make room for more cars. If you ask the people that live in the Highland Oaks area, traffic is already miserable, and yet the Netflix project is not constructed. Palo Alto Medical is not finished. The Stanford Cancer Center is not yet occupied. Swanson Ford is unfinished, and the CVS site is still sitting vacant. And that's just to name a few of the larger projects. Calculated traffic studies do not reflect our reality. The traffic report that says every intersection queue has adequate storage space where cars can wait for lights does not explain to the average citizen how much additional time it's going to take to get to or from work. What does that equate to in average annual dollars to each of us? It seems that the additional turn lanes on Los Gatos Boulevard will merge into the 2-lane Lark, and for those traveling north on 17, they will funnel down to 1 lane to get onto the freeway. Additionally, we are taking E-level traffic, level freeway segment to an unacceptable level. In the report, they don't even use the letter F to describe that people are going to find themselves in. F will be the first letter out of the mouths of these commuters. We all have our own thoughts about the F level of traffic, but all the report does is acknowledge F as a significant and unavoidable delay. Why is it that we create problems first and then 10 years later we start creating the solutions? I'm referring to the Stevens Creek Highway 17 reconstruction that is 10 years overdue and still today under construction. I like much of what I see on the North 40, but one, I do not advocate buildings higher than the general plan allows. I don't advocate a specific plan that is unspecific. I don't advocate horrifying the north end of town for tax revenues. While the north end gets developed at the same time, put in the new multimodal paths that will get bikes and pedestrians to and from the North 40, where they are developing an area for bikes and pedestrians. That helps to unify the north end of town, much like the south end, gives them an uptown that is easily accessible, and will tie the North 40 to the Los Gatos Creek Trail. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Van Natta? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Ms. Quintana? And behind her will be Sandy Decker.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. There's been a lot of comments made by a lot of people tonight. I agree with most of what has been said. But I do have a few additional concerns. I'm going to just list them out in the list because I know I'm not going to get to all of them. First, clarification in the specific plan about the historic nature of the site. I believe that there are numerous instances in the general plan that need additional general plan changes and a change on the general plan map itself. I would like to see no medical because it is such an intensive use. If a medical facility wants to come in, they can always come back and ask for amendment to the specific plan, but let's start out without it. Those are my most of my change, except for one that are substantive. The other one is on CUPs. Currently, the CUP table in the document lists CUPs, conditional uses. The exceptions that are being asked with the use of a CUP are not land use issues. They are exceptions to standards and guidelines. I believe it would be less cumbersome for implementation and not create that ambiguity of planning disciplines if instead of a CUP, it was just simply stated that these are things that may be granted exceptions, or however you want to phrase them, and they will have to have additional findings to the ones that for the basic that you don't need the CUP for, that are specifically aimed at the particular topic of the exemption being asked for. The other thing that I have been having real problems with is the document and its clarity. And to me, clarity and understanding and not sitting there scratching my head saying, well, what does this really mean? Because if it means this, then I think this way, and if it means that, I think another way. All have to do with transparency. And this document is, in my mind, needs a very good editing. Its organization is not very logical. Its format is not logical. There are inconsistencies in the format within chapters, between chapters. And the organization of the basics makes, I think, it confusing. The basic premise of this plan is these 3 land use districts. Yet everything else in the plan is not written to the land use district. It's written to a standard, a guideline, a regulation, or whatever, so that you wind up having, well, I read about transition district there, and now it's over there, and I have to put it all together, and it's totally confusing, and there are ways to change it. And I have recommended some. I sent in a letter. It has all kinds of suggestions. It was in October of this year.
Ms. Quintana, you saw that red light.
Yes,
and you know what? I just want to acknowledge that we have received your information.
You received my letter. I don't know if you received the attachments that went with it.
Okay, well, then let's make sure the staff will make sure that we do see that, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you
Well,
for
how
the
does
time
that give?
that you take. Well, we're continuing on this evening, okay? So let's,
I think you should continue the hearing
you do.
with
Okay.
public testimony to allow us to filter in all the EIR stuff that we got all in one batch that hasn't caught up with what's going on.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Decker, step forward. And Mr. Paravi is going to follow Ms. Decker, and then Mr. Schiff.
Sandy Decker, Los Gatos. So many people in this audience have dutifully sat on committees, worked on approval for specific plans, zoning laws, general plan language for developments in this town, only to have a developer come forward, ask for a PD, which is a plan development, have it recommended by staff, and all the work done by the community to protect the community is negated. I heard our new planning director state that this specific plan will supersede the use of a PD. I cannot find any reference to the hierarchy of approvals in this voluminous report. Planning Commission, please be sure the approval process is specifically stated in this specific plan. Commissioners, we are reviewing tonight a North 40 specific plan drafted by a community advisory group that didn't even feel they could recommend their report due to a lack of consensus. This report needs to be rescoped with a better impact study and options and alternatives. Why 364 homes? What would 150 homes do to the school impact? What about 250,000 square feet of commercial development nestled in a natural environment that reflects the real look and feel of Los Gatos?
Thank you, Ms. Decker. Any questions? Seeing none. Mr. Paravi?
My name is Jim Paravi, and actually I'm one of the participants for the redesigning of the World Trade Center.
You know what I'm going to ask you to do? I'm going to ask you to pull that microphone up so that you speak directly into it, and then we can have the benefit
Thank you very
of
much.
hearing your comments.
First of all, I have to thank the commission members, council, Mr. Joe Paulson, for the tirelessly working to try to make this project a reality. And of course, with Don, I think if there could be a definite compromise. So when we come over here, everybody is relaxed, everybody is happy, everybody is sharing that piece of land that belongs to the city of Los Gatos, but it belongs to the future generation. We don't know anything on this thing. In here, I sent two basically texts to Arlene. I hope that he sent these two texts to Mr. Joe Paulson. Many of the things in here that they are basically discussing.
I need for you to keep talking into the microphone, okay?
Certainly. In here, this is a National Geographic that the title is serving more than 7 billion every day. This is food. It shows. So this is one. This is one, another thing in here, that is the unbuilt San Francisco, which the planners, they came in, they created a dynamic that basically they collaborated, they made San Francisco what it is. But in here, we are talking about retailers. The Christmas, there was a research that was done. Let's say we built all these stores. I remember when I was there on the 13th of May 2010, I recommended to Mr. Don and mentioning, Mr. Don, why don't you allocate 8 acres of this particular project out of the 40 to the community? So people that are here, they'll be able to utilize it and then build a mini store for every merchant that is downtown Los Gatos without charge. By doing that, you create a corridor between the two areas. They have to put zero down for those stores. So this way, whether we like it or not, the businesses downtown Los Gatos are going to be damaged by 50–60%. And of course, what is the other dilemma? The dilemma is the rents. We can see already many people come in the city of Los Gatos. The rent is so high that they have to leave. But within this, create ownerships. We can create ownerships by creating ownerships every month that you pay that $20,000, $30,000 rent or $5,000 becomes your equity. As a result, creates prosperity and the idea that is coming from the folks in here, combining it. I have 1,000 images that I can show basically on a big screen that I don't want to basically reveal it, that we can go through it so we can see basically in images. Also, Philip Johnson, one of the greatest architects, he basically did the model so that he did the World Trade Center. Let's build a model. Let's build a working model of this whole thing. Cost maybe not more than I did model making at San State. I have a Bachelor of Science in Design. I can come in at no charge, get together with the folks,
Sir.
build the model so we can do it.
Okay, so the red light,
Always over
thank you. That's all right. And if you have any additional comments that you weren't able to give, please submit them in writing, even if you have them this evening, to the staff. Thank you. Mr. Schiff is going to be followed by Ms. Firth and Kevin Quigley. Do we have Eric Schiff here? No. So Mr. Schiff is watching from home, I'm sure. Rhodey Firth.
I'm Rhodey Firth, and I have lived in Blossom Hill Manor for 50 years. And
I need for you to just, there we go.
okay, sorry.
Good.
I've lived in Blossom Hill Manor for 50 years, and the conversations I hear about traffic have more to do with Lark Avenue and closer to the North 40. Well, the traffic, how I get in and out of Blossom Hill Manor is turning left on Farley or coming out Farley. And now it's almost impossible. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes. So either we're going to have to put a light there or we're going to have to go down Los Gatos Almaden or Blossom Hill Road. One of the people here who was talking about the traffic was talking about the developments that aren't even open yet. Well, the traffic is so bad on Los Gatos Boulevard that I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, once the Swanson Ford place opens, the Cancer Center, the Palo Alto thing, I just think we need really to, I mean, there's going to be just deadlock. Gridlock, excuse me. They're not going to be able to move. Recently I heard that they're working very hard down by 880 and Stevens Creek Road to put in a lot of freeway overpasses and things so that the Christmas shoppers can get to Santana Row and to Macy's. Well, I don't know why we don't think there's going to be terrible traffic impact eventually in Los Gatos, and I think it's very serious. The literature that I've been reading the last couple of days that I printed out, I thought was this same plan that I picked up here, but it isn't. What it was comments by the residents of Los Gatos about this development. I can't believe how many smart, bright people we have in this community and how much help they are to you. One of the things I didn't understand is someone has hired the EMC planning group to respond to all these people who write these letters to the town. Now, maybe the town hired them, I don't know that. But I'll just say this really fast. One of the people in their letters was worrying about the height of buildings. The EMC planning group says, so even if several buildings were constructed higher than 45 feet, the open areas between the buildings would allow ample views toward the hills. Now that, to me, is not a very good response.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your comments. We're going to have Mr. Quigley is going to come up, and then Stephen Pratt. Welcome, Mr. Quigley.
Hello. Hi.
There you go. That's great. Thanks.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Kevin Quigley. I'm from Oakmont Way. It's in the Highland Oaks neighbourhood where I live, my wife and our 4 kids. I've watched the neighbourhood evolve and change over the 25 years that I've lived there, and was always aware of the North 40 and that someday it might be developed, and was happy to see that the town of Los Gatos even had a plan for North 40 and would ensure organised development of the space that would serve the current local residents of Los Gatos and enrich the quality of our lives. Sadly, now that I've looked at the plan, I'm no longer excited about the development. First, instead of shops, restaurants, large stores, health clubs, personal service that we were hoping for, I see a lot focus on residential units. Currently, there's 12,355 households in Los Gatos. The addition of 365 units is a 3% increase in households. That's a significant increase for a single project. And this does nothing to enrich the quality of life in the current residents, and in fact is only degrading our lives. Traffic at Lark Avenue and Los Gatos Boulevard is already at capacity, and during rush hour causes backups stretching to other intersections. I look at the changes the traffic engineers are proposing to make to the roads and intersections and see nothing that is going to help my life. Instead, changes that they're proposing are going to make my life worse. The addition of the Centre Island and Lark Avenue at Highland Oaks blocking access to the Highland Oaks does nothing for the residents of Highland Oaks. Yet I see a new lane added to accommodate the new residents of the North 40 residential area. When I leave for work in the morning, like I did this morning at 6:15, I see I will no longer be able to turn left from Highland Oaks Drive onto Lark Avenue onto Highway 17. I will no longer be able to turn left from westbound Lark Avenue into Highland Oaks. I also look at the customers from the car wash on Lark Avenue. They will no longer be able to do a U-turn on Lark Avenue at Highland Oaks, and so will now have to use Highland Oaks Estate to access the car wash, resulting in increased traffic in our quiet neighbourhood. This is the perfect time to address the current traffic problems and poorly designed intersections. Instead, all I see are attempts to address the problems the increased traffic the North 40 residential development will cause, and nothing to alleviate the problems that the current residents endure. These issues need to be addressed, and I'm asking the Planning Commission to revisit the current proposal and instead ensure the plan enriches the quality of life of the current residents per the vision statement.
Thank you, sir. Don't go away, because I have a question too. So go ahead, Commissioner Sayak.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm curious about that intersection, the Highland Oaks Lark
Yes.
area. There's a sign there that says on, I think it's afternoons 3 to 6, no right turns into there. Signs like that, does it alleviate traffic?
It does, yes, because I was there before that sign was there.
Okay.
And yes, there was a lot of cars going through, and that sign has definitely, it has cut down on the traffic. So you will notice that, yeah, from that time of the evening, there are few cars that still go through, but not as many as there were. And the police department do go out regularly. You'll see them there once in a while ticketing people, and they get plenty of people. As my father was visiting recently, I said, "Hey, Dad, sit here and watch this here. See that police car?" And sure enough, car came around. 5 minutes later, another car.
Okay, so that's good information to have. But based on what is proposed,
yeah,
the design, in your opinion, does nothing to help you
nothing
as a
to help
me
me
in
or
that
any of my
neighborhood.
neighbours, any of our residents. They're going to
Okay.
block off. We will have no access to get out on. When you look at the report, that intersection, number 13, they called it, it listed was one of the highest numbers for the wait. It was up to 80 seconds at one point. They're going to cut it out completely. We now have to drive all the way around the block. So it's now going to take us 2 minutes, 3 minutes to drive all the way around to get onto Highway 17.
Okay, thank you.
Don't go away. So I have a more philosophical question for you. I appreciated your presentation tonight, and you used a phrase, enrich our lives.
Yes.
A number of times. So if we were to enrich your life and the life of your family, what did you think you were going to see?
Right. I
at
took the
North
enrich
40?
our lives from the vision statement that was presented here tonight, so that's why I incorporated in my notes here. Yes.
But just tell me, what would enrich your life in North 40?
The traffic, the number of houses that you're proposing, the stuff that's going to increase traffic in the area is not going to enrich our lives. We'd like traffic to be put better. You know, this is a great opportunity to look at the traffic problems, the existing traffic problems. I saw the plans of what they're going to do, and what they're doing, they're widening Lark Avenue, they're doing everything to accommodate the North 40 residents and the problems it's creating. Nothing is addressing the current problems we have.
All right, thank you.
And one of the speakers already mentioned adding an extra lane for people on Lark Avenue to get onto Los Gatos Boulevard at 5 o'clock, because that backs up. And
All right,
okay.
Don't leave yet. Commissioner Bondami.
So living so close to the North 40, traffic aside, would you patronize the North 40 with retail or any of your unmet needs? Do you think that you could have unmet needs served by the North 40?
Retail, yes, and that's what I was excited about seeing. I was excited that there was going to be retail there, and I was hoping that, yeah, things were going to be within walking distance. Unfortunately, I see that they're trying to put residential right on Lark Avenue, and the retail is going to be up the other end, and it's not going to be developed for another 10 years or so. They're focusing on doing retail first, or sorry, doing the residential first.
Would you still go downtown?
Yes. Not as much, no. If the right restaurants are there, the right shops and facilities.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you again. So we have Mr. Pratt, Mr. Pacheco, and Ms. Landry coming up.
My name is Stephen Pratt, and I live on Highland Oaks Way.
Mr. Pratt, just pull that microphone right up to you. There you go.
Thank you. My back wall abuts Lark Avenue, and so please consider that with the comments I'm about to make. I have just a couple considerations I'd like for you to make when evaluating this. First of all, power. They just had to string an electric cord or electric wires over the Los Gatos Bridge, the 17 bridge on Lark Avenue, just to supply electricity, I'm told, for the new development across from Rotten Robbie's. I'm wondering, where is the additional power going to come for the North 40, and will it require an additional large electric pole to be assembled and set up in gaudy fashion as the last one? And my second consideration that I would like for you to make is, again, about traffic. First of all, in the slideshow we saw earlier, I saw the phrase unavoidable impact with reference to traffic. And I think that that's somewhat callous and not considering those of us who live directly adjacent to Lark and in the Highland Oaks area. And I'd like to explain why I think that's the case. First of all, there's the specter of air pollution. We are bounded by the 17 freeway, Lark Avenue, and close proximity to the 85 freeway, so we are already inundated with a significant amount of pollution. So much so that all of our patio furniture and our cars and even my pool has a thin layer of black dust from just 24 hours of traffic that comes through that location. It's hard to imagine if you added more traffic how that might be somehow lessened. It would certainly get worse. Another consideration is the accidents that happen almost on a daily basis because we are so close, because I live so close to Lark Avenue. I frequently hear the screech followed by the bang. Happens all the time. Again, this is not going to go down, it's only going to increase as a result of the increased traffic. Thirdly, I'd like to state that on my little cul-de-sac, there are 8 kids plus or minus 10 years old. And people, even though it's illegal during certain hours, turn right onto Highland Oaks Drive and speed down that street very quickly. I would like a barrier to be placed at that location, perhaps one that the emergency vehicles can roll over, but I would like that to be stopped altogether because I believe that that's a threat to our children. And lastly, well, that was my last point. I beg your pardon.
All right, sir, thank you. Don't leave yet. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your comments. Mr. Pacheco?
See if I get this right. Tonight I'm speaking, it's Len Pacheco, Hernandez Avenue. Tonight I'm speaking as the chair of the Historic Preservation Committee. And I'm real happy that Commissioner O'Donnell brought to your attention a correction on the meeting notes from the Historic. The Historic didn't put in to the extent feasible. They're pretty firm in what we wanted with regard to the historic aspect of the development. And I think you probably got a copy of this, so it's pretty clear. And a lot of it includes agricultural use. Tonight I became aware of a desk item that Historic has not seen, and it really contradicts what our recommendation was. If you look at the town seal, what do you see in the middle? Is it an orchard, or is it a grouping of high-rise or low-rise or medium-rise? No, it's an orchard. So I would like to recommend that Historic have a chance to look at this desk item that negates all of the recommendations that we made in our meetings.
Mr. Pacheco, just for the benefit of everyone, could you talk about, or can you just identify which desk item? Because desk items were passed out, so there was more than one this evening.
Oh, surely. It's an overview. It's your desk item number 1. It's just titled desk item, and toward the back of it is an analysis from a company, EMC Planning Group. We've never seen this before. It impacts what we were saying at Historic.
I appreciate that. And have you completed your remarks?
Yes.
All right, so then we have some questions here.
Okay.
Commissioner Talasfor?
Thank you very much for coming down. And I noticed that desk item as well, and I'm glad you commented on it because I was wondering if your committee was aware of that. So, getting back to your discussion at the Historic Preservation Committee, what I wanted to know is, it says in our staff report that the preservation, there was also interest, this is part of your summary of your discussions, there was also interest in the preservation of a portion of the orchard to provide a context for the two structures and to demonstrate a real, authentic working orchard. So my question is, what was the committee's thoughts when those words were written down? What would that look like in this development? I don't mean the one that Grosvenor's offered here, but I mean just in general.
Well, it's not the responsibility of the committee to design a product.
Well, I understand that, but you use the words real, authentic working orchard. So to provide a context. So what were you thinking? What was your committee thinking when they wrote that? Or when you
As I recall, it meant that what was there, regardless of the kinds of fruit trees that are there now, there was a recognition that, in fact, the origins of this valley, of which we're part of, was orchards. So we thought perhaps the layout, the classical layout of a portion, or it could be new fruit trees, that gave you the impression that, good grief, this was once a working orchard. Look at the barn that's there. Look at the layout of the trees. Look at the implements that were used to harvest these fruit trees. Very significant and historic aspect, not only of Los Gatos, but of Santa Clara Valley. Does that help?
Well, it helps. I'm still I'm grappling with the specifics of how that would be incorporated into any development on this site. Would it be an area that was historic in context only, or would it have stores around it? Do you see what I'm saying? Is it a park? I'm trying to
It could
figure
be
this
all.
out.
It could be all of the above. There was some reference to 5 acres being set aside to address the agricultural aspects of the development or the plan. So actually, it could be all of the above.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Now, Commissioner Bandami?
Can we have that document on the overhead projector so we can be on the same page?
Are we looking at the minutes of the historic?
Okay, I wasn't quite sure what you had from EMC.
I have the minutes.
It's the desk item number 1 this evening.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right.
It's Exhibit 16 for the commission.
Exhibit 16, correct.
Thank
Thank you,
That
Mr.
helps.
Paulson. That's what I was struggling for. All right.
If you look at what I've circled, that was on our minutes. That isn't, in fact, what happened at the meeting. We never referred to the extent feasible. We were very specific at what we wanted. So somehow that language was added.
Right, and we covered that earlier, Mr. Pacheco, so
Right.
thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to call Susan Landry. and then Woody Needham, and then John Shepherdson. So is Ms. Landry not here? All right. Mr. Needham?
Good evening. My name is Woody Needham. I live in Blossom Hill Manor as well. Rhodey first been there 50 years. I've been there 47. I just have a couple of points. I agree with some of the comments that you have made about the worries about the height restrictions. I think there are way too many fudge factors in this document that needs to be tightened up. I think we need to use the 35 feet that's the county, that's the town standard, and rarely deviate from that. A couple of other points, just one, the number of housing units on Lark, I've raised this over and over again. 364 seems like a tremendous number, way too many. No one has ever told me where that number came from. At one meeting of the 17 that I've attended or so, someone from staff just threw out 364. The EIR, in response to my concern about that, said they could have developed 750. The fact is that the town isn't allowing 750. They're allowing a maximum of 354. And it would have been more honest of the environmental impact report to say, of the 364 that they're allowing, subtract the 32 that already exist, and probably 90% of the ones they will build will be jammed into the Lark Avenue third. I think that is not the town of Los Gatos. It's interesting that the EIR uses as a justification for putting the housing next to Lark Avenue that it's next to residences across Lark Avenue. Well, we learned tonight that the residents who live across Lark Avenue aren't too happy about the development of houses in that part of the North 40. If you're going to use the guiding principles to achieve the vision that's stated in this document, you can, in one stroke, minimize the impacts on schools by either reducing the number of houses allowed or requiring that a certain number or percentage be relocated into the Campbell School District in the north section. You can do that by one stroke, one simple thing, and you will have mitigated what you're supposed to according to the guiding principles. In terms of traffic, you know what, I just would like to piggyback on what Jack Van Naden said and what many other people have said about that. There's nothing more to say about traffic. It's clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Needham. Did Ms. Landry come in by any chance? No. All right, so then John Shepherdson. John Shepherdson will be followed by Andy Wu, who will be followed by Jan Olson. That is the completion of the cards I have, so if anyone's waiting to the very last second, they need to come forward. Mr. Shepherdson, thank you.
Thank you. First, I apologize for the attire. I came from a hula hoop class. I wasn't sure I was going to even speak tonight.
Yeah, do you want to share with us the secret of where that hula hoop class is?
Is this part of my time? It's in Cupertino.
All right.
So first point, bravo to Wendy and Dawn for their candor and their access. I really appreciate that, and it's a breath of fresh air. Secondly, simplified. To me, a 35-foot maximum height limit makes it very clear. It's consistent with the general plan, small town character, minimize view corridor mistakes, a clear standard for the developer, protects views of our green bowl, the mountains that we have. Third point, traffic. I echo the comments of others. We're heading towards our region towards the LA traffic. San Jose, in the last 2 years, 25% jump, fifth worst in the country, jumped from 13 to 5th. Council member Przinski commented in the weekly about the traffic problem. So that should be considered. Fourth point, I think I would suggest maybe some age restriction on the residential, because the project may not result in the intent of the design may not result in the reduction or less students being in the schools than as intended. Next point, non-compete with the commercial non-compete with the downtown. Some real clear controls on that, and maybe more analysis so that we don't gut the downtown. Next point, biking. I echo Ms. Risto's comments that of a pedestrian walk, bike bridge, connectivity between this project and the downtown area, and I like the idea of shall language. I'd also like the solar. I heard that tonight. I would like shall language with respect to solar. There is cool roofs and cool roads that as I recall seeing that in a specific plan, I think that's wonderful, and I applaud that, and I think that's forward thinking. And I guess just going back to the 35-foot height limit, I do have concerns that Commissioner O'Donnell raised in terms of where in the general plan does it allow for this exception. And my last point is just an overview of quality of life, that this project, we do our best to enhance and protect the quality of life here in Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. Seeing no questions, Mr. Wu, you're up next.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I was hoping that I would have the last card, so I would be able to close, but somebody else beat me to it. I've heard much of the testimony that was presented this evening, and a couple of things struck me as I was listening to the audience. There's really nothing that I can add to the questions that this committee, this commission has asked of the presenters that I want to add to. However, I'm reminded of a phrase that Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, known as the father of the atomic bomb, uttered on 16 July 1945. And I know Chair Smith may want to ask the town attorney whether I should be cut off for giving a history presentation, but I guarantee you this is not a history presentation. He quoted something from the Bhagavad Gita, the Indian Creation Chronicle, and the quote was, I've become death, the shatter of worlds, or in some translation, the destroyer of worlds. That referred to the fact that he, unwittingly or wittingly, unleashed the nuclear genie that couldn't be put back. This committee, this town, is not necessarily faced with something of that magnitude, but it is faced with, as has been repeated time and time again, the largest project that this town has ever seen. Once this project gets going, you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I've heard comments as to what has been done or not been done to mitigate traffic in the neighborhood, to address concerns of the neighbors, and these are frankly issues that I had never even thought about, despite the fact that the organization that I belong to has hosted, I've hosted myself 2 public outreach informative meetings with the developer's representative, Don Capobras, and I think Wendy Baker came in, afterwards, and she's been at those presentations. And it didn't occur to me that there were certain segments of the population who had known nothing about this project, didn't have any time to comment. Now, there's been a suggestion that this board put this matter on a separate calendar for further consideration and to do further traffic studies. I would say, given the magnitude of the genie that this town is about to unleash, that probably is a wise consideration to make.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. Any questions? Seeing none. Jan Olson, followed by Jason Farwell, followed by Bill Cushy. You are not indeed.
Hello. Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm Jan Olson. I live on Lester Lane in Los Gatos. For those of you who are not familiar, Lester Lane, I'm on the other neighborhood that borders this or is across the street from the North 40. I live directly behind the Office Depot. We moved in 20 years ago next month. Yay. It was still the Nissan dealership. Well, it was the empty lot. I was part of the charrette in November of 1994 that looked at Los Gatos Boulevard and how we broke up into like 10 or 12 teams of how we each envisioned Los Gatos Boulevard to look. It was mostly out of fears for Office Depot and what was going to happen there. They were under contract, but they hadn't signed off on it yet. There was a lot of discussion about the Office Depot, a lot of fears. We're not going to have big box in our store, we're not having chains in our town. Our town's full of chains. Height was a real big issue, and it was 35 feet with the piece that comes up, the parapet that covers the air conditioning. Had to be pedestrian friendly. The whole boulevard was supposed to be pedestrian friendly, and then everybody kind of had a vision for what the North 40 was going to look like, even though at that point there was nothing going to happen because the Yukis weren't going to do anything. A lot of open space, soccer fields, movie theaters, community, all community-based. Anyway. Living on Lester, which is behind, like I said, our fears is it's going to become a cut-through. Los Gatos Boulevard is a mess. Lark is a mess. Try going on Lark anytime after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, coming off of 17 or coming from Winchester. You can't, everybody's juggling, everybody's cutting in. You can't turn right onto Los Gatos Boulevard. You can't turn left. God forbid somebody stops to go into the car wash. You know, it's a horrible mess. Coming out on Los Gatos Boulevard in the morning, come out on Gateway. If you wanted to turn right onto Los Gatos Boulevard and then get into the left turn lane to turn left on the Lark to get onto 17, you can't do it because that left lane of Los Gatos Boulevard backs all the way up. Oh my God, I'm running out of time. Trying to go over 17, the overpass, it's scary. I don't like doing it now to get over to there's no room to expand. You've got that little sidewalk. There's no room to expand. Who's going to pay for it? You've got the 17 on and off, plus 85 is right there. That's going to be a major reconstruction of that intersection. And like I said, who's going to pay for that? Having Starbucks, when you guys put Starbucks over at 85, that's so changed the traffic pattern over there. It's so impacted us all the way down at Lark. And that's just Starbucks. Can you imagine what a big development is going to do?
Ms. Olson, thank you for your comments. Your time is up.
Okay.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you again. Mr. Farwell, followed by Mr. Kashi, and then that is it for the evening. So, Mr. Farwell,
all right, thank
welcome.
You. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Just a full disclosure, my family owns a couple of commercial properties downtown. I've lived here for approximately 45 years. I've seen some good development, some bad development, some good changes, some bad changes, like all of us in this room. You know, I feel this potential change at the North 40 is obviously undetermined at this point in time. But from everything that I've seen and read and reviewed, this plan is far too dense and impactful on our town. I go back to the vision statement that was essentially prepared by the committee, and the words that kind of jump out at me are the small town character. And how is this development going to maintain that small town character? I don't think that the specific plan accomplishes this. And that's nothing against the committee. I sat in on a lot of those meetings, and the committee did very, very good work. It's just an incredibly difficult process. Ultimately, this development, in my mind, is going to directly compete with downtown. Obviously, I have an interest in that. I've done the calculations. I've made this statement a number of times at the committee hearings and before certain bodies. I've calculated roughly that the downtown is approximately 230,000 square feet on the ground floor for retail, and that includes the restaurants as well. The proposed development for retail at the North 40 is 400,000 square feet. It's going to far surpass our existing downtown. Not to mention, our downtown has a significant amount of regulations. It sounds like, from everything that I'm hearing and from what I review, that the North 40 isn't going to be subjected to those. It's a fairness issue. How does downtown compete against another development that does not have the same regulations? And I'm specifically referring to the CUP process and formula retail. Additionally, parking is going to be very ample at the North 40. It's going to have plenty of parking. Downtown, we struggle for parking. We all know that. Again, how does downtown compete? It's interesting tonight listening to Don speak. I've met with Don. I like Don. But he admitted here tonight that this is one of the best retail sites in the Bay Area. I don't disagree with him. I don't disagree with him. And the fact of the matter is it's so good that it's going to decimate downtown if they do what they want to do. That's my time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Farwell, thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none. Mr. Kashi.
Hi, I'm Bill Cashy. I live in the Highland Oaks neighborhood. I've been there for about 15 years now. And my concerns are basically echoing those that have already been stated. I just wanted to support some of the current, the things that are currently going on. LARC is broken today. If you go during rush hour, and I'm sure many of you have already, it backs up all the way to Oka Road, sometimes beyond that. Trying to get in and out of the car wash is a challenging thing for a lot of people to do. And it just complicates things. There's a lot of people diving into the traffic there, perhaps creating 2 lanes that turn right onto Los Gatos Boulevard would help mitigate that problem. There's still issues, though, and concerns about, what happens to the traffic pattern through the Highland Oaks neighborhood. I was part of the traffic mitigation that went on there a few years ago, where we implemented a stop sign there. We asked for speed humps. Those came into parts of the neighborhood, but not all of them. We also limited the right turn lane ability at that point. And it does work. It's been a good solution, but it's not a complete solution. Really, if the police aren't there monitoring it, we do see a lot of people go through. And every time they come over there and monitor it, they do ticket people. I don't know what the stats are, but I'm sure you could probably find out. It is an inconvenience not to be able to turn left onto Lark, but when there's traffic there, I can't turn left anyway. I think it's more important to make sure that the neighborhood itself is not impacted by the additional traffic. The bridge across 17 really isn't big enough to handle the increased traffic that I would anticipate from either 300 and plus residents, or even the shopping center that might go in there as well. And don't get me wrong, I know that we're going to develop this land, and I really appreciate the work that's been done to date on this specific plan, and I think that some very good work has been done. But the traffic mitigation, the traffic enhancements, or whatever you want to call them, they really aren't sufficient in this plan, and I think really you need to take another look at what's going on there in that neighborhood during rush hour in the morning, during rush hour in the evening. There's going to be, I'm also concerned about the connectivity to the Los Gatos Creek Trail too. for the kids and for residents of the area as well.
Thank you. Your time is up. We appreciate your coming this evening and waiting till almost the very end. So thank you again. And so our final card, final card is Brent Ventura.
Good evening. I'll keep it short. When I was volunteering in this community back in the 1980s, we started studying this area here. And I think we came up with the first iteration of a specific plan. I believe your predecessor, Lee Bowman, was the one who actually coined the phrase North 40. So we've been at this a long time. We still don't have the solution here. There's a heck of a lot of information. As my kids say, TMI, too much information, too many late items. I would suggest we take our time. We've been studying this since the 80s. I think we can wait a few weeks, few months to make sure we get it right. It's too darn important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. I am now going to close the public portion of the public hearing. And what that means is that now we are going to have the commissioners either share their thoughts, make a motion, and given the lateness of the hour, does that actually say 10:30? Okay, all right. So I have Plan B. Okay, and the Plan B, with the agreement of my fellow commissioners, would be that we delay our deliberations, and we have not heard from the response from the applicant. Mr. Paulson, that would be something we would have to hear the next time we meet as well. We did not get a response from the applicant. And then we have questions and then deliberations. So my suggestion is that we set this for a date certain. And if we did that, Mr. Paulson, what would the date certain be?
August 13th.
August 13th. All right. Are you about to make a motion? No?
Oh, I can certainly
Okay.
make a
No,
motion.
go ahead.
But before I do that, if I may ask a procedural question.
Yes.
Public testimony's over, and we will continue to date certain. If there's information that I already know I would like, is it the appropriate time to request it now so that at that future time it's available instead of, could we do that? Or is that something that we would all save to the next meeting?
Mr. Paulson?
It would be helpful, any information that we can attempt to gather between now and the next meeting, or it's obviously at the chair's discretion as to how she wants to handle that.
Because I'm also thinking that as I close the public portion, Mr. Town Attorney, I do need to hear from the applicant, or we do need to hear from the applicant, don't we? If they have anything to add?
Yes, but that can be done at your next meeting. The question is whether commissioners now for tonight, before we continue the meeting, wanted to put in their comments, at least as to what further information they'd like to have before the next meeting as part of the applicant's response.
If we hear from the applicant at the next meeting, have I reopened the public hearing?
No.
No. All right, that's what I wanted to know. That was the procedural question. I think someone else, Commissioner Telesfor?
Yes, I will not be here on the 13th, and I would certainly like to, be part of this after sitting through all of this. So.
Are you suggesting that we continue this evening?
We continue?
If we continue, we do have a stop time of 1 hour.
No, I'm not considering that we continue this evening.
Oh,
But
okay.
could we choose another date?
Sir, I'm sorry, you cannot speak out of order. Okay, thank you. Yes.
We're going to have that problem in any event because it is going into August. Somebody's always going to be gone. So the only thing I can suggest, and I think the continuance is a really good idea. We have a lot to digest and a lot to think about saying. However, if Commissioner Telesfor, and she's not going to be here at the next sitting, I don't suppose there would be anything wrong with having her make any comments she wants to make this evening. I direct it to chair as a question. I don't know.
Are you asking the chair?
I was asking her if that's permissible.
Well, and I'm wondering, Commissioner Talasfor, if you are prepared enough in terms of your sorting through the many issues we've covered this evening.
Absolutely. In my 13 years of serving on this planning commission, I have never seen so much paper and information come to me. I have written down some, brief comments, but nothing that I would ever offer tonight, I don't think. I would like to see how else we could do this. I mean, we couldn't try to go for.
Well, let me reiterate that I
the
do.
other thing, I just finished this. The other
Certainly.
thing is that there's a lot of information that I didn't have a chance to really assimilate and digest and reference back and forth between specific plan and the general plan. So I would sure like to have some more information.
Here's how I would like to proceed, because I do think that Commissioner O'Donnell has a point that almost anytime we go forward, we are going to run the risk of vacations, etc. So I would like to move forward on August 13th. And however, what I would like to do is to go back to Commissioner Sayak. I think you had a list of the information you would like. And then Commissioner Talasfor, I'm wondering if you could share with us the additional information you would like, because no matter what, we know that we will benefit from that. And maybe as Commissioner Sayak is speaking, you could just gather together some particular information you may think you need. It looks like Commissioner Bandami, you're also going to come up with some additional information. So why don't we just start with Commissioner Sayak?
Okay. And again, this is the list that I think I'll be asking of it, so if it could be ready, that would be great. The first, we heard about the consistency issue between the general plan and the specific plan, whether there's a consistency in height requirements, if that could be further clarified and exactly pointed out where that consistency or inconsistency is happening. I would like the Historic Preservation Committee's response to the response to their comments. I think that would be helpful. I would like to hear the response from all 4 of the school districts. That was something that was specifically asked as it left Sustainability Committee, so I'd like that response again. And if you could just clarify who is exactly responding from the school districts, that would be helpful. This may be a little bit more information, and I need some staff guidance, but there is significant information lacking from the urban decay analysis. And I'd like a better, I'd like almost like a focused session on what parameters might be helpful. I think there's enough testimony that shows what is before us is just a general discussion, but I'd like actual data that shows which areas. I guess I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. I'd like a little bit more information from the urban decay analysis. Very specific. What types of retail would be detrimental? What types in their analysis would be complementary? Just a little bit more specific than the rhetorical that we have now. I would like more information, maybe an alternative to the circulation pattern that's currently in the specific plan that actually requires this multimodal path that has been discussed. And with that, I'd also like a little bit more analysis on the bike paths that are in there. Does a Class 2 bike path encourage more bicycle riding than a multimodal? That type of analysis, I think, would be helpful. And again, if there's an alternative to the circulation patterns that is currently presented, would be helpful. I know that there was a suggestion from Mr. Lockridge on changing the traffic lights, things like that, so that there's a comparison of what's before us and what could be a better alternative, I think would be actually helpful. And the last one is with regard to the EIR, there was a look at alternatives, and the environmentally superior was no project. And there was, one of the alternatives was decreased commercial but increased residence. Is there an option at this point to actually look at another alternative, which is decreased residence, decreased commercial? And what would that entail? So that's the questions I would be asking of staff, and if that could be prepared ahead of time, that would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Talasfor, if you need just a couple more minutes, I can go forward myself. All right.
Well,
okay.
Let me just weigh in.
Sure.
Commissioner Sayal covered a lot of them, but I would like to have a little more analysis of the retail and the unmet needs there, and the inserting, because of the inserting regulations and the relationship between what we have and what is in the downtown. It was so much dense information on that. I had a very hard time understanding it. I'd like that to be broken down into something a little more simpler that I think people could understand. I would wondering if we've ever thought about doing a traffic study that would be reality here in town, since we are now operating at a level F in that area, in some of the areas. Have we thought about waiting until we have the other 3 big developments in place online, and then do a current traffic study about just what we have? I think we heard from so many people tonight that traffic is an issue, as I think anybody who lives here knows that. So to me, it needs to be addressed a little more stringently. Let's see, what else? I don't know how we're going to do this, but I think that we definitely need to really relook at height restrictions and view corridors and how that's going to be written into the specific plan. And I also question the number of the housing and the types of housing and where it's placed. Let's see. I would like to see perhaps some options with the open space, keeping in mind the historic preservation's recommendation. And also the actual circulation of this project. I am very concerned about 4 egress points accumulating onto the Los Gatos Boulevard and Lark. And I would like to see other options for keeping the development traffic on the property as long as it can, as it filters onto the streets. This doesn't look like a very, how do I say it, easy way out. It just looks like the traffic will be dumped onto streets. So I'd like to see another circulation plan. And that's all I can think of for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Talasfor. I would, I'll go next, and I think we do need to clear up the CUP issue. That is very important covers a lot of the retail concepts. We asked a question which I think can be answered easily, but we don't have time for it this evening, is can the plan include specific numbers for senior housing? We talked about the bike path connection. The height restrictions. Does the EIR adequately cover the information or the questions that were raised this evening? I think the power needs was actually an interesting question. Is this going to require an additional transformer station? I don't think that's something that we've even thought about. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Commissioner Bondami?
This is extremely challenging and comprehensive, and I'm not sure we can have all the studies we want by August 13th. I like Matthew Hoods, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but I like his input that he provided on proceeding further, and that being perhaps sending the EIR back, having individual hearings on different subject areas, because we're dealing with a lot of subject areas, and we want to get this right.
Commissioner Bondami, if I could just interrupt you here, what I would like to do is just have the questions that that you would like staff to answer before our next hearing, because at the next hearing we may in fact entertain some of the things that you're mentioning tonight, but we are not at that point yet.
Okay.
In other words, you're in the comments section, and we're not there yet. That will be the next meeting.
Okay, all right. I would like a lot of the wording tightened up where we're more in conformance with the general plan. There seems to be a lot of contradictions with the specific plan and the general plan. I don't think we're on the same page. And that being with, for example, the height restrictions. There's some discrepancies there. Trying to keep our vision statement with the North 40 in line. It doesn't appear to adhere with what's being presented to us. I have concerns about the CUPs, height allowances, the traffic impacts, the school impacts, density and intensity.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Paulson, can we set this on a date certain?
You can. We just need a motion for a date certain. August 13th was the last one we spoke about, so you need a motion for that.
All right.
I'll move that we continue tonight's hearing until August the 13th.
All right. Do I have a second? Commissioner Sayak?
I'll second the motion.
All right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Right. All right. And one opposed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to adjourn the hearing, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.